Timeless Assassin. By author Raj_Shah_7152. Chapter 537 to 565. Chapter 537, Consolidation. Leo's POV, Zone 1 Military Base. Leo and Ver touched down at Zone 1 Military Base, which was the most strategic stronghold on the planet. It was important not only because it housed the enemy commander Su Pei, but also because it stood closest to the planet's largest city, called Fanfic. Naturally, there was not much for them to do at this stage of the war, as by the time they disembarked from their ship, 95% of the initial fighting was already wrapped up. Reporting, the enemy commander has retreated to Fanfic City, while the major guarding this base has been defeated in battle. The stragglers are being rounded up as we speak. Your orders, my lord. The Legion commander asked Ver, who immediately glanced towards Leo for advice. No need to be rash, let's consolidate first, treat the wounded, secure the perimeter, and set up anti-air defense systems, in case they send reinforcements to reclaim the planet. Once we do that, then we can send scouts into the city to find out just how many enemies are hiding in there, and where exactly the enemy commander is, before deploying our men for a dogfight. This day is already ours. Now it's time to not make any rash decisions and build on our advantage. Leo advised, as Ver immediately nodded in agreement. I agree with my cousin here. Let's do as he suggested, unless you have a differing opinion, Legion Commander, he asked, as the Legion Commander gave him a thumping salute. No sir, I completely agree with Lord Shadow Dragon's approach. Let's do as he suggested. The Legion Commander said, as he turned and quickly ran off to relay relevant orders. Once the fighting had finally quieted and the last of the stragglers had been rounded up, the battlefield became more subdued, as the dragon's army transitioned from destruction to control. Captured soldiers from the righteous faction were dragged and herded into the open plaza at the base's center, their faces streaked with ashen defeat, as they knelt in silence beneath the smog-filled sky, heads bowed low as restraining chains were fastened around their wrists and ankles. The cult soldiers worked efficiently, moving down the lines without hesitation, their expressions full of joy and elation as they hauled prisoners into tighter groups, stripping away armor, checking for hidden weapons, and forcing everyone, including the injured, to sit upright with spear points pressed lightly against their necks. They derived a certain grim satisfaction from disciplining the enemy, yet not a single curse or demeaning insult was hurled their way, as under Leo's strict orders, every prisoner, regardless of their affiliation or past crimes, was to be treated with a baseline of dignity, where they would not be stripped naked, nor subjected to unnecessary humiliation. Some among the captured began to shed tears quietly, while others stared blankly at the blackened ground, too hollow to react to their sudden defeat. A few clenched their jaws, eyes burning with resentment that would surely turn into festering hate if they were ever allowed to live long enough to carry it forward, but for now, their strength and morale had already been sapped from their bodies, and so they complied. Meanwhile, near the southern half of the base, where the fighting had been fiercest, small fire teams had begun their next task of reclaiming what remained, as they moved through scorched corridors and broken storage facilities, extinguishing the final bursts of flame and dragging corpses into covered piles for later disposal. Some areas still smoked with heat, the walls broken and cracked where spells had detonated or hovercraft engines had exploded, yet the cult's engineers paid it little attention as they focused on salvaging functional parts from the wreckage. They hauled out boxes of ammunition, crystal cores, rations, and steel frames that could be melted down or repurposed later, as they quickly saved everything valuable that needed saving. Mages specializing in water spells stood at key junctions, conjuring curved arcs of pressurized mist that swept over entire buildings at once, cooling the hot spots and clearing the air, while elemental mages from the rear squads used mana to reinforce the fractured pillars and stabilize the remaining towers, just enough to buy time until replacement materials could arrive. On the eastern end of the base, in the flattened space once used for storage convoys, several white canvas tents had already been raised, the insignia of the dragon's army fluttering faintly along their edges as the medical divisions got to work. Wounded soldiers were carried in by the dozens, some unconscious and covered in blood, others limping on torn muscles and cracked bones while still managing to salute their superiors on the way to treatment. Healers moved between the cots with steady hands and focused eyes, applying mana salves to deep wounds and binding fractured limbs with glowing gauze, while medicine specialists and potion boys worked behind the tents to restock their supplies without a moment's delay. Time passed quickly, and the afternoon gradually faded into evening, as the tempo of the base shifted once more. Teams of able-bodied soldiers continued working without rest, unloading and positioning the anti-aircraft defense systems brought in by the cult ships, as the objective had now shifted from conquest to consolidation, and from seizing ground to securing it. Engineers oversaw the installation of detection radars and mana-reactive sensor grids, while pilots busied themselves with refueling procedures and post-battle maintenance, tending to the very aircraft that had helped secure their victory just hours earlier. No one remained idle. Every hand moved with purpose, every second was accounted for, as the cult soldiers pressed forward with ruthless precision, transforming what had once been a righteous faction's stronghold into the foundation of their own expanding domain. Morale remained high, yet the air carried with it a sharpened tension, as every soldier understood that while today's battle had ended in triumph, the larger war had only just begun. They had taken all the military bases across the planet, but the enemy had not yet been purged. The real war was only going to begin tomorrow. Chapter 538, Scouting Report. A random scout's POV, Fanfic City. Once the sun began to go down, several scouts were sent into Fanfic City by the Legion commander, with the primary objective to gather information on enemy and civilian movement. For these scouts, entering Fanfic City had proven to be easier than expected, since the entire city looked like a storm had just passed through the place. The commoners were not clueless, and they had noticed the thousands of ships descending from the skies earlier in the day, at which point they already understood that the planet was now under siege by the cult. As a result, they began hoarding food, water and other essentials like mana lamps and oil, since they knew that a curfew was most likely to be imposed in the near future. Market streets had hence already been stripped of anything worth eating or drinking, as broken stalls sat toppled on cracked stone tiles, while empty crates and torn ration sacks lay scattered across intersections that once held food vendors and supply convoys. Shop doors had been nailed shut from the inside. House windows were either shattered or boarded, and entire alleyways stank of spoiled fruit, sweat, and rusted metal. Civilians moved like ghosts through the side lanes, arms loaded with whatever they had managed to hoard, from bundles of rice wrapped in cloth to old plastic bottles refilled at public wells. Children were seen dragging sacks heavier than their own weight, while mothers whispered instructions into their ears. Patrolling soldiers scanned the rooftops with tight jaws, wondering if an enemy soldier lurked there or not. No one spoke louder than necessary, and no one lingered in the open longer than they had to. There was no need for announcements or declarations. Everyone inside the city already understood that tough times were coming ahead. The worst kind of tough times that started with a new flag being raised over the city gates. Blockades had been set up at regular intervals using overturned vehicles, scrap metal sheets, sandbags, and debris. Some were manned by uniformed soldiers, while others had no guards at all, and were left standing as deterrents more than defensible structures. As the scouts reached the inner districts, it became clear to them that military presence, though scattered and sparse in this region, was still noticeable, as the soldiers seemed to have spread across the entire city like ants. By now many civilians bore the look of fighters. It had become impossible to tell who was military and who was not, as old men carried concealed blades beneath their cloaks, and women with market aprons moved like they had seen dozens of battles before. Even teenagers looked twice when crossing intersections, their hands never too far from their bags, as if each one carried more than just bread. As in the inner district, there seemed to be no sign of chaos, only preparation. At the very center of the city, in the old public square, the enemy commander had made no attempt to conceal himself. Su Pei had erected a forward camp in plain view, surrounding himself with loyal officers, mana barriers, and an array of heavy shield plating reinforced by portable turret grids and dozens of defensive spells. Archer towers had been raised on each corner of the square, carrying some of the best long-range archers and snipers that the defending forces had, as more than a few scouts fell to their assault. There were no civilians in the surrounding 3 blocks, which had likely been cleared to prevent interference, and the few patrols that remained near the outer fringe looked calm rather than nervous. Coup. Seeing yet another scout die to an archer's arrow, his partner did not linger, nor did he push any closer to the center than was required. His mission was to observe and return, and there was no doubt left in his mind that Su Pei was ready to make a stand here. And hence, with his mission complete, he turned to report his findings. Leo's POV. Once multiple scouts reported their findings, Leo opened a map of the city and began marking every spotted blockade and patrol party on the map, as soon an initial picture emerged on what the enemy defenses looked like. He had many ideas on how to approach this operation, but he let the Legion commander and other lieutenants decide on the best course of action, as he understood that in the end, they were the ones risking their lives to capture the city, not him. Dupravel, after having been given the confirmed location of the enemy commander, left at once to try and assassinate the man, as he assured Leo that he would return within 3 days' time with Su Pei's head. As for how he was going to achieve this feat, Leo never asked, since he knew that it was too early for him to understand the movements of a monarch, yet. The rest of the cult army were given orders on how to march into the city come first light tomorrow, as the lieutenants held meetings with their sergeants and captains to make sure they understood their tasks tomorrow. Every squad was briefed on their assigned quadrant, every platoon warned about potential ambush sites, and every strike unit reminded that while this was a civilian-heavy zone, showing hesitation here would only get them killed. Most of the soldiers finished their preparations to march by midnight, polishing their weapons in silence, checking their mana cores twice over, and placing their spare armor pieces beside their bunks for good luck. Engineers continued working through the night along the outermost trenches, installing mana detection arrays and fortifying the outer perimeter with attack cannons, while several junior officers double-checked the setup of medical camps, so that retreating soldiers could receive immediate medical attention. Soon, the final perimeter scans were completed just before dawn, as scouts confirmed no unexpected movement from the enemy's side. And so, with all variables accounted for and every soldier briefed about their role, the siege of Fanfic finally began with first light. Chapter 539, A Forgotten Prodigy. Heart of Fanfic City, Su Pei's POV. There was a time, long ago, when the name Su Pei had meant something. Back when he and the current patriarch of the Su clan, Su Tang had both been freshers at the Rodova Military Academy, it was Su Pei who had drawn all the attention, all the whispers, and all the envy, as instructors labeled him the next great prodigy of the Su clan, a man destined not just to rise but to dominate. His combat scores had outclassed every student in his batch, while his mana cultivation rate had broken long-standing records that even the professors privately acknowledged might never be broken for at least a couple more decades. He reached the transcendent tier by the age of 27, a full year ahead of Su Tang, and by the time he stepped into the monarch realm at 50, the gap between them had only grown wider, as Su Tang still lagged behind, struggling to keep pace. Yet, when the time came for the Su clan to appoint the next patriarch of the clan, it was not Su Pei who was chosen. It was Su Tang. Su Tang wasn't chosen for his strength, or his outstanding leadership qualities, no. He was chosen because he was the direct descendant of Su Ren, the Su family god, and because it was Su Ren who made the ultimate call on who was to be appointed as the next patriarch. Su Pei had not protested. He had held onto the quiet hope that his merits alone would be enough to earn him the seat at the head of the clan, and while he had been disappointed, he still understood the political logic behind Su Tang being named patriarch, given the bloodline he carried. What he had not expected, however, was to be ostracized so deliberately, nor harassed so consistently, by the very brother he had once protected and guided through the academy halls. Everyone in the clan had known the truth. Su Pei was the more capable warrior. the more qualified leader, the rightful heir, and that made Su Tang feel threatened. In the years that followed, Su Pei was slowly cut off from the core circles of clan governance. Assignments that should have gone to Transcendents or even Grand Masters were instead passed to him, with his final deployment being to planet Coral, that had no true strategic value to the clan at all. Su Pei was given the smallest budget and the weakest garrison, to govern this useless planet, all under the guise of the clan trusting him to keep their borders safe. Su Pei of course understood the truth. However, he still chose to serve without complaints, because duty was the only thing he still understood. However, unfortunately for him, Su Tang did not stop at just harassing him, as he came for his children as well. His firstborn son, barely 35 and freshly promoted to Transcendent, was deployed on what had been called a containment mission, to suppress civil unrest on a minor Su clan-controlled planet. But in truth, it had been a death sentence. He had been sent without proper backup, without logistical support, and without any elite-level protection, so when the planet erupted into open rebellion, he was left stranded behind enemy lines. His body was never recovered, and Su Pei's wife, who had once been a vibrant soul with laughter in her eyes and strength in her hands, broke soon after. She stopped speaking, she stopped eating, and within 2 years, she was gone too. His second son, bitter and disillusioned, chose to leave the Su clan entirely, defecting to the universal government's side, where Su Pei heard whispers of him working under a false name, living a life far from the shadow of the family that had ruined them both. And with that, Su Pei had nothing left to protect. No sons, no wife, no future, only planet Coral. So he drank, not for the pleasure it brought, but because it temporarily allowed him to forget about his pain. The years passed in a blur of half-hearted administrative reports, empty briefings, and unattended garrisons, as his once pristine uniform gathered dust and his blade remained sheathed longer than it ever should have been. But today, when the skies above Coral cracked open with the descent of cult warships, something inside him had shifted again. He had not waited for an order. He had risen from his quarters, eyes bloodshot and robes still wrinkled from sleep, and taken to the sky without ceremony, cleaving through a dozen enemy aircraft in a single flight path, as if the last 120 years of silence had never happened. And now, with the enemy army approaching the walls of Fanfic, he stood again where he should have been all along. Not because the clan deserved his loyalty, but because the people under his protection had done nothing to deserve being abandoned. Keep a constant lookout for enemy scouts, Su Pei said quietly, his eyes scanning the rooftops as a passing glint caught his attention near the northern gate tower. Lieutenant Burrell, what's the news from the eastern unit? He asked without turning, his voice calm but sharp, as if the muscle memory of command had never truly faded. Stable for now, sir, came the reply. The enemy movement seems mostly focused on the north and west side for now. Double the patrol routes in the north, and rotate your snipers every 2 hours. I want eyes that don't blink. He walked slowly across the temporary command platform, adjusting the buckle of his faded gauntlet as old instincts guided his steps. Officers bowed slightly as he passed, and though they said nothing, he could feel the shift in their posture. He was no longer the bloodshot drunk they remembered, but the sharp, commanding warrior they had once heard stories about. A warrior who now stood as their last hope of making it off planet Coral alive. Chapter 540, Dupravel makes his move. Fanfic City, Dupravel's POV. Dupravel had grown up during the same era as Su Pei and Su Tang, so he needed no introduction to understand just how monstrous Su Pei had truly been in his prime. He remembered crossing paths with the man once or twice at informal banquets, back when Su Pei had still been regarded as the Su clan's golden child. And even in those brief encounters, there had been something undeniable about his presence, an ease in the way others deferred to him, which had made quite the impression on Dupravel. He had not liked Su Pei back then, not particularly. But he had respected him. And now, it was precisely because of those memories that Dupravel believed this to be a challenging mission. For unless Su Pei had truly regressed as a warrior over the past century and lost his edge completely, This was most likely going to be the fight of a lifetime, one that would demand every ounce of cunning and every trick Dupravel had in reserve to win. Unlike the cautious approach he had been forced to take while infiltrating cult territory, Dupravel did not seem to be worried at all about being caught inside Fanfic City. He moved swiftly and with intent, for unlike the transcendent realm of power he had been bound to during that last mission, he was now back to his best as a full-fledged monarch. And that made all the difference. He knew exactly how he wanted this fight to play out, and hence, before moving towards the city center, he first moved through abandoned alleys and sharp corners, which he identified as perfect locations to set up traps. Some of these traps were meant to stall, others meant to injure, and a few designed purely to force Su Pei into movement patterns he could predict. He used every trick in the book to gain an undue advantage, starting with drinking 2 rare-grade potions in advance, one to temporarily boost his agility and another to accelerate his mana recovery rate, despite knowing that the backlash from drinking these potions would be large once their effects wore out. However, with him not planning on dragging this fight out anyway, he was not worried about that outcome, for he planned to either finish this fight quickly, or retreat back to safety. He had also taken the liberty of lacing every single blade and throwing dagger in his arsenal with a fast-acting paralytic poison that was strong enough to weaken the muscles of even a monarch-class warrior, if not halt them outright. Still, even after preparing all of that, Dupravel knew it might not be enough. Because Su Pei was not a target that he could sneak up on. From his memory of Su Pei's legend, Dupravel recalled the man to have a skill called Danger Intimidation in his arsenal, one that alerted him to the presence of any killing intent being projected in his direction, which acted like a sixth sense that made him nearly impossible to ambush. Hence, Dupravel did not even bother wasting time attempting a surprise strike. Instead, he chose to stand openly at the edge of the city square, cloaked in his gray and blue assassin robes and white mask, fully deflecting every archer shot that came his way with effortless, contemptuous flicks of his blade, as he simply waited for the enemy commander to walk out. And sure enough, moments later, a calm voice called out, "Stop, there's no need to shoot." The command came from the central tent, and the soldiers immediately froze in place as Su Pei stepped into view, his expression unreadable and one hand raised to signal a halt. "He's a monarch. You people can't take him," Su Pei warned as he stepped forward alone, while unsheathing his longsword with a slow, deliberate motion. "Shing." The metallic ring of the blade echoed faintly, but Su Pei didn't seem to notice. His eyes were fixed on Dupravel, as he studied him in silence, noting every inch of his frame. There was something undeniably off about this man. Su Pei had never heard of any white-masked assassin under the cult's command, and he had been keeping close track of their upper-echelon warriors for decades now. Aside from Monarch Charles, no other operative had been recorded at this level of power. Which meant that either this man was new, or some old monster that had defected to the evil side. "Who are you?" Su Pei asked, his voice sharp but measured, as he continued to study the man's posture, the stance, the blade angle, the air of confidence he carried without a shred of hesitation. "I've never heard about the cult having any other monarch except Charles." Dupravel tilted his head slightly, his movements almost theatrical. "You may call me Viper," he replied, voice calm and light, as though this were merely a polite duel and not a blood-soaked assignment. Su Pei's lips curled into a slow grin, one not born out of amusement, but from the simple recognition of what stood before him. "Everyone else, get out of this square. Now," he said, his voice loud and commanding without needing to be harsh. "This man is too dangerous for you to be around, leave him to me." There was no argument, no hesitation. The soldiers began scattering quickly, boots clattering against the stone pavement as they dispersed along the perimeter, trying to put as much distance between themselves and the incoming clash. But they hadn't made it far before Dupravel moved. With a flick of both wrists, a dozen daggers burst forth from his sleeves like flashes of silver light, slicing through the air with pinpoint precision. Shua, shua, thud. The whistling wind was the only warning they received before bodies dropped, some pierced clean through the throat, others grasping at their chests, already dead before their knees hit the ground. Oops. My hand must have slipped, Dupravel said, lowering his arms slowly, like a man easing back after a long stretch. I was aiming for your head. Su Pei didn't answer. He didn't need to. His expression turned stone cold as his grip on the longsword tightened, and with a sudden burst of power, he dashed forward, launching himself directly toward Dupravel in a high-speed charge. Clang! Steel collided with steel in a violent spark as Dupravel parried the incoming strike cleanly, and without wasting a second, kicked off the ground and vanished into retreat, slipping between the narrow streets of Fanfic City, as he controlled the tempo of the battle. Clang! Clang! He led Su Pei towards the part of the city where traps had already been set in advance for this very confrontation. And despite knowing the dangers, Su Pei gave chase without hesitation, not because he wanted to, but because he had no other choice. Dupravel had just killed a dozen of his men with ease, without even needing to try, and if he was allowed to roam free, there was no telling how much damage he could cause. Unchecked, Dupravel could potentially wipe out half his forces by tomorrow, and Su Pei could not take that chance. Since the enemy had an unexpected monarch within their ranks, he had to deal with him now while he still had a chance. Chapter 541, Dupravel vs Su Pei. Fanfic City, Dupravel's POV. Boom! A section of the abandoned school building crumbled into dust as Su Pei's heaven-piercing arc slashed through the entire structure and even a neighboring house along with it. Dupravel didn't bother clashing with it head-on, as he blinked out of sight mid-movement, hopping backwards from one rooftop to another, deliberately maintaining a set distance while Su Pei gave chase. Running like a rat, Su Pei tried to bait. How disappointing. I thought monarchs fought their battles with pride, even if they were affiliated with the evil cult. Dupravel snorted as he landed atop a broken rooftop and spun, flicking a pair of daggers downward at his feet. Behind him, the ground erupted the moment Su Pei touched it, as crimson snaproot vines burst from the concrete in an explosion of mana, wrapping around his ankles like iron chains before igniting with condensed flame. FWOOM. Su Pei let out a grunt and flexed his legs as he broke free of the restraints with sheer force. Thud. A moment later, he once again landed on Dupravel's tail, but needed to use mana to douse the fire that had caught onto his robes and charred his boots. Grunting from such a small attack. I expected more from you, even if you're affiliated to the cowardly Su clan. Dupravel retorted, as Su Pei cracked his neck in response. Wow. I can't believe I let that attack hit. I must be getting rusty. He said, before letting out an amused smile. Dupravel's eyes narrowed. That was the kind of smile that didn't belong on the face of someone worried of losing a battle, as alarm bells instantly started to ring in his head. Whoosh! Su Pei shot up like a missile, his body blurring through the air with a trail of golden aura as he drew back his blade and unleashed Starfall Cleave, a downward slash so heavy that it collapsed the building they were fighting on in one fell swoop, burying Dupravel under rubble. But the instant the dust rose, shink, a dagger flew out sideways, striking Su Pei's shoulder midair. The blade hissed as it pierced his armor, laced with a paralyzing toxin. Su Pei winced but didn't flinch. Poisoned blades. What are you, a sewer rat or a back alley whore? Call me what you want, Dupravel's voice echoed from behind as he leapt out from a side corridor, already mid-throw with a trio of curved knives aimed at Su Pei's knees, collarbone, and elbow. Ting asterisk ting asterisk ting. The monarch spun and deflected all three with swift precision, but his eyes narrowed as his foot touched down on a suspiciously wet piece of street tile. Click. BOOOOM. Explosion glyph detonated at his feet, engulfing him in a spiraling pillar of fire and throwing him across the plaza. Dupravel took a breath, crouching low behind a broken carriage as he quickly dipped another blade into a vial of highly acidic venom. Still too early to go for the kill, he muttered to himself. First let's damage his armor. Su Pei emerged from the smoke cloud moments later, coughing once, his once pristine military robes tattered as it revealed the glowing marks along his forearm. Since he had been cut by Dupravel's poisoned blade, he was forced to circulate mana to isolate that region and keep the poison from spreading. Cute tricks, Su Pei said as he wiped soot off his cheek. But you're starting to bore me. With a roar, he raised his hand and cast a domain spell. Heavenly Domain. Weight of the ancients turning the surrounding 100 meters into a crushing gravity field. The sky shimmered and the very air grew heavier, as Dupravel's knees buckled slightly, his cloak flapping downward like it had been soaked in lead. "Huh, you like running like a rat, masked man. Try doing that now," Su Pei grinned. Dupravel's body pulsed with mana as he activated Veilstep Mirage, his form blurring into 5 illusions that scattered in every direction. Su Pei didn't even blink. "Tricks of this level don't work on me," he said, as he immediately chased after the real figure, only for his foot to land on yet another trap set by Dupravel. Beezeet. Kaboom! A powerful bolt of lightning suddenly materialized from nowhere, and struck Su Pei on his shoulders, as the monarch frustratingly grit his teeth in annoyance. The constant traps were hindering his battle rhythm, and making it very difficult for him to actually focus on his opponent's movements. "Damn, you're lucky we are in the middle of a city, because if I were not, I would have unleashed my true power and gotten rid of this entire district, turning it into a flat ground," Su Pei said, as he grabbed his sword with both hands and unleashed the attack, Invisible Slash. Cut. Dupravel's eyes widened in shock, as an invisible blade slash sent him flying across the street, blood trailing in the air. Crash. He crashed through a fruit stall and skidded to a halt near the abandoned library steps, coughing blood. "Oh yeah, he's still a monster," Dupravel muttered, brushing broken porcelain from his cheek. Su Pei walked forward, dragging his sword along the ground, golden sparks flying with each step. "You're fast, I'll give you that," Su Pei admitted, his expression sharpening. "And annoyingly persistent. But you don't belong with the cult, you don't know a single signature technique that those bastards use." Dupravel stood again, wiping blood from his chin. "I don't need to belong anywhere," he said, voice low. "I just need to win." He snapped his fingers, and a glyph hidden behind Su Pei detonated, sending a chain of piercing lance mines flying at him from behind. Su Pei turned just in time to raise his blade and activate Steel Guard Mantle, a defensive skill that cloaked his body in hardened mana plating. Shatter. The lances shattered upon contact, sparks flying like fireworks, but one slipped through and grazed his side. Su Pei staggered for half a second, steadying his breath as a faint streak of blood dripped down his hip. "Can you even fight without relying on tricks?" he asked, as Dupravel responded with silence, spinning a dagger in each hand as he took a defensive stance atop the library ledge. The two stared at each other for a moment, both breathing hard, both bloodied, both calculating their next move. Then, Su Pei spoke again. "The more I fight you, the more I feel like I've seen this fighting style before." Dupravel froze, ever so slightly. Su Pei continued. "You fight like a snake. Precise. Fast. Always retreating. Always striking only when the odds tilt. Just like someone I remember, a certain someone they once called a dragon slayer." He raised his blade again, eyes narrowing. "Tell me honestly, who are you really behind that mask?" Chapter 542, Why? "Tell me honestly, who are you really behind that mask?" Su Pei asked, as Dupravel couldn't help but chuckle at his childish question. "Commander, respectfully, if I wanted to reveal my identity to you, I would have done so when we first met. What makes you think that I'd change my mind mid-battle?" Dupravel asked, as he once again began running away, forcing Su Pei to keep up. However, now that Su Pei doubted his real identity, he no longer chased him with the same murderous intent as before, as he couldn't help but wonder as to why someone like Dupravel Nuna would defect to the cult. "You remind me of an old beast I once knew. A Black Serpent guildmaster by the name of Dupravel Nuna. Word is, the cult executed him not long ago. But looking at you now, I can't shake the feeling that you're him. What I don't understand is why a man like you would ever side with the cult. You hated the cult to your core the last time we met. You even killed their former dragon, Noah Ashburn. So why are you standing with them now?" Su Pei asked once again, as somehow he couldn't shake off this gnawing feeling in his chest. Wasn't loyalty to one's clan and faction supposed to be the ultimate goal of life? Weren't you supposed to keep supporting your faction even if they mistreated you or suppressed you? Then why? Why was Dupravel, who was one of the faces of the anti-cult movement, now fighting on their behalf? I need him to talk to me. I need to understand what made him turn his back on the universal government. Because that way, maybe, just maybe, I'll finally be able to understand why my second son chose to abandon the Su clan. Su Pei thought, as he sped up once more and decided to use his domain spell again. Heavenly Domain, Weight of the Ancients. He unleashed the spell once more, as he created a massive crater on the city street and managed to make Dupravel buckle to his knees yet again. Stop, please, I beg of you. Tell me who you are and have a conversation with me, and in return, I swear I will allow you to land one clean blow on me, which I will not dodge. Su Pei offered, as Dupravel felt his eyes widen with shock. He could hear the desperation behind Su Pei's voice, but he could not understand the reason behind it. Why was the monarch so desperate to hold a conversation with him? Just what possibly did he wish to talk with a man trying to kill him? The answer to these questions, Dupravel did not know. However, what he did know was that an opportunity to land a clean blow was too good to miss. All right, I'll answer your questions if you survive the blow first. How does that sound? Dupravel countered, as he did not trust the man enough to hold his word after he had given him what he wanted. No, you're a snake and a member of the evil cult. You have no honor. I cannot trust your words. Su Pei retorted with the same argument, as Dupravel simply shrugged his shoulders in response. Fine by me, I never wanted to talk in the first place, he said as he turned to sprint yet again, only for Su Pei to beg him to stop yet again. Wait, Su Pei commanded, as Dupravel hesitated. Fine, I'll let you have your blow first. Just promise to answer my questions later. Su Pei conceded, as once again Dupravel was left stunned by his choice. Just how desperate was this man to hold this conversation? What was it that he needed to know so badly? Very well. If you survive, I swear on my honor to answer you to the best of my abilities, but that's only if you survive. Dupravel said, as he closed in for a blow, his killing intent erupting to its peak. The end slash. Dupravel used his ultimate beheading move, the end slash. It was a monarch-level technique capable of decapitating even dragons with a single strike. However, much to his surprise, a powerful blue barrier blocked his blow right before the tip of his blade could touch Su Pei's neck, as a hidden life-saving artifact seemed to have been triggered. You cheat. Dupravel snarled, as Su Pei grinned ear to ear. He had fulfilled his end of the bargain. He had granted Dupravel a clean striking opportunity without putting up any defense. However, he had said nothing about life-saving artifacts coming into play. Oops, I guess I forgot to mention about my life-saving artifacts. Well, in any case, you're honor-bound to answer me now. Don't worry, I won't cheapshot you while you're talking. I do have honor of my own, Su Pei said, as Dupravel let out a long sigh and lowered his weapon. Yes, your assumptions about my identity are not false. I am exactly who you think I am, so move on. What's your second question? Dupravel said without any emotion, as Su Pei nodded like he had expected this much. Why? Why join the cult? Su Pei asked without ceremony, as Dupravel let out a complex grin behind his mask. Why? He repeated, his tone filled with sarcasm. The question you should ask, is why not? Because, even after serving the righteous faction like a dog for my entire life, in the end I got nothing but betrayal. My precious Twin Fang planet was destroyed. My Black Serpent Guild was forcibly disbanded. My best friend Antonio, killed. The treasure of my guild, which I obtained myself from killing the previous dragon, was plundered before my own eyes. And instead of being killed alongside my guild, I was instead given a new assassination mission. This time in the heart of cult territory. But even there I was set up. Morris played me and sent me to what was an assured death. So is it any wonder why I switched sides? I was treated no better than a disposable tissue inside the righteous faction, so I joined the cult in hopes of earning my freedom, and finally living as a free man once I do. Dupravel replied, as Su Pei's eyes widened in surprise at his words. Dupravel's response resonated with him at a deep level. More than he cared to admit. Chapter 543, Breakdown. Rage bubbled inside Su Pei's heart when he heard Dupravel's reason behind defecting. He couldn't believe that Dupravel decided to switch over to the cult just because he would have died otherwise, as the whole ordeal just smelled fishy and cowardly to him. So that's it, Su Pei said, his voice laced with venom. You turned away from your beliefs the moment things got hard. You shook hands with the devil just to keep your own head. He asked, as Dupravel tilted his head with the same maddening calm that had defined him throughout their entire duel. Were you dropped on your head as a child? Dupravel asked, as he spun a dagger beside his forehead in a circular motion, signaling to Su Pei that he was a fool. Dying for your beliefs is the ultimate honor, Su Pei growled, his glare deepening. By defecting you tainted your own legacy. Tainted everything you once fought for. He accused, however, Dupravel's expression didn't change. If anything, he seemed to pity Su Pei. Commander, if you really believe that the righteous faction is righteous, and that the cult of ascension is evil, then there's no point in us having this conversation. You're simply not mature enough to understand the universe for what it truly is. But if you're ready to accept the fact that both sides are morally gray, then yes, I have a reply that might interest you, Dupravel said, as Su Pei looked away from him in anger, but did not walk away. The cult is not evil, at least not any less evil than the masters you serve. And the honor you speak of is nothing but empty praise. If the Su clan truly valued you, they would not have sent you to a desolate planet with no strategic importance. If the Su clan appreciated your efforts, they would not have sent your firstborn son on a death mission. The truth is, your loyalty towards them is entirely one-sided. And that's your fatal flaw, Dupravel said, as his words cut Su Pei deep. You think your son died with honor. Dupravel continued, his tone like a poisoned whisper slipping through the cracks in Su Pei's armor. Or do you think the Su clan betrayed him and called it sacrifice? You know nothing. I know enough, Dupravel snapped, interrupting him for the first time. I know your second son didn't leave you because he hated you. He left because he saw what you couldn't. That no matter how loyal you were, the Su clan would always view you as expendable. Su Pei scoffed, but his voice faltered. I'm not expendable, guarding our borders against the cult is an important and honorable job. He argued, but he found the words coming out of his mouth to be increasingly unreliable. Come on, even you don't believe that. Because, if the Su clan really viewed this planet or you as an important asset, then there would be 10,000 ships above the skies of Coral by now, that would have come to rescue you. But they aren't coming, are they? Dupravel asked, as Su Pei struggled to find words. It's not that they don't care. It's just complicated. Reinforcements would suffer heavy losses. It's suicidal to come now. Su Pei argued, trying to make sense of his own words, but by now, he knew deep down that he was wrong. While Dupravel narrowed his eyes in disbelief. If Su Yang, the patriarch's son, was the one stranded on this planet, do you think they wouldn't burn 1,000,000 lives to save him? He asked, as Su Pei had no answer. Dupravel pressed on, his words like hammer strikes against a crumbling wall. They would send fleets to save him. They would shatter the sky if they had to. But they won't do that for you, will they? Because you're just a dog in their eyes. Loyal, obedient, replaceable. You're a monarch. A man who has held down this planet for decades. And yet, not one ship has come to reward you for your years of loyalty. Su Pei's hands trembled, his jaw tightening as denial clashed with truth. My clan, he tried. Doesn't care for you, Dupravel said coldly. That's the truth. And you know it. Silence stretched between them like a chasm. Then, slowly, Su Pei's knees gave out. His blade slipped from his hand, clattering onto the concrete street as he fell to the ground, staring at the cracks in the stone as if they mirrored the ones forming in his spirit. A voice from the past returned, soft and distant. They don't want you in the clan, father. You're loyal to a cause that hates you. You're a fool. He remembered the rain that day. He remembered his second son's eyes that were filled with pain, not rebellion. And for the first time, he understood. You're right, Su Pei whispered, shoulders trembling as the weight of years collapsed on him all at once. I am a fool. Dupravel remained still, watching cautiously. Su Pei looked up, his voice shaky but sincere. Tell me, Duper, no. Viper. The cult. Are they a worthy organization to pledge loyalty to? Dupravel blinked, caught off guard by the question. Will I have a fresh and meaningful start, if I defect like you? The assassin didn't answer right away. He studied the man kneeling before him, the same warrior who had once eclipsed Su Tang as the generation's strongest warrior, and who was now stripped of pride and desperate for a new beginning. As never in all his years could Dupravel have expected this outcome. Su Pei, Dupravel said quietly, I don't know if the cult is worthy or not, because technically, I'm not sworn to serve the cult. Su Pei's breath hitched. So who did you swear fealty to? He asked, as Dupravel let out a long sigh, feeling sort of ashamed to admit who his master really was. My master, he's young, and he respects me. He's a no I mean, an upright and reliable gentleman. He is very popular as well, Dupravel replied, as he said everything but the name of his master, prompting Su Pei to blink in confusion. Chapter 544, An Offer He Can't Refuse. Leo's Paw, the Broken Zone 1 military base. Leo sat in a half-collapsed, dimly lit room with Dupravel to his right, Dumpy perched on his shoulders, and the enemy commander Su Pei seated directly across from him. How the fuck did I end up in this situation? Leo wondered, as no matter how hard he tried, he couldn't make sense of the situation he now found himself in. Not the setting, not the people, and definitely not the conversation. Su Pei, the enemy monarch who had retreated into Sanfi City with his forces just a few hours ago, now wanted to surrender and switch sides to the cult. Not only that, he even wished to swear fealty to Leo directly, under a contract that was eerily similar to the one Dupravel had signed with him. But the question was why? Why was the enemy's battlefield commander suddenly so eager to defect? Why had Dupravel, who was sent to kill him, instead returned hand in hand with the man? And why had Dupravel insisted that Leo meet Su Pei alone, without alerting the others? None of it added up. Ha ha ha. You're making the right decision, mongrel human, by choosing Lord Father to be your master. Ha ha ha. Serving him will be the highlight of your entire meaningless life. Dumpy said, as he did not seem to give two fucks that the man in front of him was a powerful monarch. Or that he could probably kill him with a flick of his wrists. Does the frog always behave like this? Also, how did you even tame an ancient swamp frog? Aren't they notoriously difficult to tame and raise because of their bad temper? Su Pei asked, as Leo immediately grabbed Dumpy by the face and prevented him from lashing out, which he knew his frog was very much ready to do. My pet is called Dumpy. If we are to develop an amicable relationship, I suggest you give him appropriate respect. Leo said, before releasing his grip on Dumpy's face, as he gestured for the frog to stay calm. I haven't decided if I want to serve you or not. But I couldn't help but feel intrigued to meet the man who could make Dupravel Nunes serve him, even though he's a grandmaster. So here is my proposition, Su Pei said, as Leo leaned in, paying close attention to his words. If you promise to trade in the soldiers you captured, back to the Su clan, instead of selling them into slavery. And promise to do the same with soldiers who will surrender from here onwards, then I'm ready to lay down my weapons and not participate in this war. Su Pei said, as Leo nodded in understanding and gestured for him to continue. Regardless of whether or not I choose to serve you, this part of my offer stands. I've realized that fighting for the Su clan is meaningless, and hence, I will not risk my life for them anymore. Nor will I risk the lives of my men for a dying cause. Su Pei said, as he seemed to be slightly ashamed of himself when he spoke these words. As for whether or not I serve you personally, he continued, the fire returning to his eyes, I suggest we settle that with a duel. I'll restrict my strength to the Grandmaster tier, and if you manage to beat me at equal terms, I'll join you under the same contract as Dupravel. I'll serve you for 20 years. With 60 days a year off to do as I please, and the option to walk away from this contract as a free man at the end, with all my crimes against the cult pardoned. But if you don't beat me, and I choose to not serve you, I want your word that you will provide me with a craft and a safe passage out of this planet, as I'll probably live the rest of my life on a neutral planet. Su Pei suggested, as Leo raised an eyebrow at his words. He did not understand the motivations behind Su Pei's actions, but Dupravel seemed eager for him to take Su Pei under his wing. And hence, after thinking about the offer for a while, and making sure that there were no drawbacks for him regardless of whether he won or lost, Leo eventually decided to agree to his terms. I accept. But if you don't mind me asking, why did you choose me for these negotiation talks? You do know I'm not the commander-in-chief here, right? I'm only the shadow dragon. I'm not the hope of the cult. Leo questioned, as Su Pei simply chuckled at his words. I don't give a rat's ass as to what your designation is within the cult. I came to you, because Dupravel Nunes seems to think that you're a man of your word, and someone who will not hesitate to turn on the cult, if the cult ever messes with your people. I've once made the mistake of offering my loyalty to an organization that did not care for it. I do not wish to make that same mistake again, Su Pei said, as Leo once again glanced towards Dupravel, who nodded in approval. Although this whole scenario seemed absurd to him, he trusted Dupravel's instincts on this topic and accepted Su Pei's request for a duel. All right, I'll fight you in the abandoned forest, 3 hours from now. That way, we won't have too many people around us when we fight. Leo suggested, as Su Pei nodded in agreement. 3 hours then. I'll see you there, he said, before turning on his heel and walking out, his long coat trailing slightly behind him as the broken door creaked shut in his wake. Leo leaned back slightly in his chair, eyes still fixed on the space Su Pei had just vacated, while Dumpy shifted his weight and nestled into the crook of his neck. 20 years of service for a single duel, Leo muttered under his breath. A bold wager, Dupravel replied quietly, arms crossed as he leaned against the wall. Leo didn't answer, but a faint glint passed through his gaze. If he won, he'd gain another overwhelmingly powerful servant under his command, one whose loyalty, in the cult's ever-shifting game of power, could tilt the entire board. Chapter 545, Seeds of Doubt. Ver still had no idea what Leo was up to, as Leo hadn't gotten the time to explain anything to his cousin brother just yet, especially with how suddenly Dupravel had pulled him into this secret meeting. And by the time it was over, Leo's mind was already shifting toward the upcoming duel, forcing him to cast aside all other thoughts as he began mentally preparing for battle. He didn't think that relaying the information to Ver was an urgent priority, and hence did not even pay it any mind. But others, who weren't privy to the truth, had already started misreading the situation entirely. I'm telling you, my lord, I saw Viper bringing the enemy commander Su Pei into our camp secretly. I saw him meeting the Shadow Dragon in an abandoned meeting. This is not good, they might be plotting something bad. Valtteri pressed, only for Ver to raise a quiet hand in denial. You don't know enough to be sure as to what cousin brother is up to. I'm sure there is a genuine explanation to this whole situation. Ver replied, as he projected his blind faith towards Leo. My lord, even if there is an explanation, this situation needs immediate monitoring. I have placed a tail on Lord Shadow Dragon, and I urge you to follow him. He seems to be heading towards the open forest. Perhaps to organize a second meeting. Valtteri pleaded, as Ver looked hesitant to both follow or dismiss his request. Think about it, my lord, why would the Shadow Dragon need to meet the enemy commander in secret? And if he's making a big move, why would he not tell you about it? Are you not the commander-in-chief of this army? Are you not the man leading everyone in here, including the Shadow Dragon? Valtteri reasoned, as he placed small seeds of doubt in Ver's mind. His guard, that monarch-tier fighter, Viper, he was supposed to kill the enemy commander, not walk back in here with him. No matter how you look at it, there's something extremely fishy about this situation. Please sir, please I beg you to look into it. Valtteri pleaded, as finally, Ver seemed to be convinced by his words. Fine. I'll follow cousin, but not because I doubt him, but because he might be in trouble. Ver said, as Valtteri kowtowed in thanks. Thank you my lord, thank you, please follow me, I'll lead the way for you. Meanwhile, the isolated forest, Leo's POV. The isolated forest earned its name from its unique geography, being the sole patch of woodland nestled in the heart of a barren continent, surrounded on all sides by endless stretches of desolate, lifeless terrain. With barely any adventurers passing through and only the occasional wild beast roaming its quiet expanse, it served as the perfect place for Leo and Su Pei to settle their duel, far away from civilians, and free of the burden of collateral. Would you prefer that I place one arm behind my back when I fight you? Although I'll handicap myself to the Grandmaster tier, the difference in experience between us as fighters is simply too large. I've seen a full century or two of battle more than you, so if you wish, I'll really tie one arm behind my back. Su Pei offered before the two of them faced off, as Leo felt his eyebrows twitch in disrespect at his words. On one hand, he was not the kind of fighter that threw away any unfair advantage coming his way. But on the other hand, he did not need unfair advantage when facing a Grandmaster tier warrior. He himself was a peak Grandmaster, and had the confidence to beat anyone fighting him at the same level. No need, I'll take my chances fighting you with both arms. Leo replied, as Su Pei grinned at his words. If nothing else, at least his potential future master did not seem like a coward. Very well. I hope you don't regret this choice later. Su Pei said, as he unsheathed his long sword, and gripped it with his right arm, before assuming a fencing-like battle stance. Just bring it. Leo responded, as he unsheathed two daggers from his utility belt and crouched slightly, his stance wide, as he invited Su Pei in for the first attack. Rustle. A faint gust of wind breezed past their cheeks, plucking a single tree leaf from a nearby tree. And as soon as that leaf fell, Su Pei burst into motion. Shua, shua, shua. He closed in the distance between himself and Leo, thrusting quickly to try and test his opponent's reflexes. However, Leo was not amused by his attempt. Parry, parry, parry. Having activated parallel processing as soon as the battle started, Leo saw the strikes coming towards him at a rather slow motion, as he felt underwhelmed by how genuinely sluggish they were. Oh please, at this pace, it would be me who would tie a hand behind my back. Leo countered, as he easily parried all three thrusts with just one dagger, pleasantly surprising Su Pei in the process. Are you really just a Grandmaster? Su Pei asked, as he upped the tempo and struck Leo once more, this time with more speed and power. Block, block, block. Once again, Leo blocked all attacks with just a single hand, as although this time the jabs were 50% faster than before, it seemed to give Leo no trouble at all. The hell, his speed and reflexes are already akin to a peak transcendent tier. The kid is unbelievably agile for a Grandmaster. And even the mana flowing in his body is smoother than that of any Grandmaster I've ever met. It's almost as smooth as that of a mid-tier transcendent warrior, with an unnatural concentration of mana near the center of his chest. Su Pei thought, as he saw the mana flow within Leo's body, and was stunned by the sight before him. Mana flow within Grandmaster warriors usually looked turbulent. It had ebbs and flows as it traveled throughout the body, and those ebbs and flows became less and less noticeable as one progressed as a warrior, completely disappearing once they became a demo god. However, Leo at Grandmaster tier already had the smooth mana flow of a transcendent, in what was a phenomenon that completely blew away Su Pei's mind. This kid, just what the hell is he? This bonus chapter is sponsored by patron Ace King 137. Please thank him in the comments for the same. Chapter 546, Excellence in Combat. The Isolated Forest, Leo vs Su Pei. Dupravel felt two intruders approaching the battle area long before they actually arrived in the vicinity. However, after realizing that it was just Ver and his bodyguard, Dupravel once again paid them no mind. Leo vs Su Pei was a very interesting battle in his eyes, as although on the surface it looked like a regular fight between two Grandmasters, where neither fighter made any big moves. Deep down, the cause and effect behind each attack was simply marvelous for those who had enough knowledge to understand it. Clang, clang, clang. The tempo of the battle kept increasing from the start till this point, where now, Leo was finally forced to use both hands and block the incoming attacks using both daggers. "Are you properly warmed up now?" Su Pei asked, as he pressed down on Leo using his supreme swordsmanship skills, which were theoretically impossible for any grandmaster to defend against. The Roaring Tiger style of sword fighting consisted of 6 linked moves, with each move flowing into the next like a seamless current of blades. It was not a style meant to overwhelm with brute force, but rather, one that sought to wear down the opponent's guard through rhythm, deception, and precision. Each strike served as both a blow and a feint, dragging the defender into a false sense of balance before yanking it out from under them in the next motion. The first strike was simple, a downward diagonal meant to bait a high parry. The second twisted underneath that parry, turning the blade mid-swing to slash from below. The third came horizontally with greater speed, pushing against the newly shifted guard. The fourth was a tight spin, flipping the blade over the defender's weapon and exposing their entire center. The fifth, a step-through thrust aimed directly at the solar plexus. And the sixth, a whiplash draw cut from an upward angle, meant to sever the neck or the head depending on the height. Any ordinary grandmaster would find themselves overwhelmed by the fourth move, their balance gone and their guard blasted wide open, so that the final 2 strikes landed as clean killing blows before the defender could even reset their stance. And to make matters worse, Su Pei had long evolved the style beyond its original form. Every slash carried with it a secondary motion, subtle illusions layered over real strikes, each cloaked in microburst of mana that shifted the perception of timing and trajectory by mere milliseconds. Just enough to mislead even the most seasoned veterans, who would find themselves dodging shadows while the real blade carved into their ribs. It was a style designed not just to win, but to dominate. Yet Leo wasn't fazed in the slightest. Clang, 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 dodge, clang. He met each strike head-on, not just with equal tempo, but with precise intention, as if he knew the script of the dance before it even began. His left dagger parried the first blow diagonally, then twisted to catch the rising second. His right hand intercepted the third, knocking it aside with the flat of his blade, before both arms shifted in perfect unison to deflect the fourth spin cleanly. And then, without missing a beat, he stepped back a half pace, angling his body just enough to avoid the fifth thrust while using his left dagger to redirect the sixth. His body moved like water around stone, flowing just far enough to stay untouched, but never more than was necessary. To a normal onlooker, this entire sequence would look nothing more than a routine spar. Just 2 grandmasters squabbling, but only Dupravel and Su Pei understood the true meaning behind Leo's dominance. The 2 of them had no idea that Leo could see killing intent. No idea that Leo could see the exact trajectory of the enemy blade before Su Pei swung it. And hence, to them, the ease with which Leo battled seemed to be outrageous for a simple grandmaster. "I can somehow keep up against this old monster because he has restricted his strength and speed to the grandmaster tier, but even with killing intent, I can't see a single opening on his body," Leo thought, as although he defended well against Su Pei's attacks, he did not see the familiar red dots of vulnerability on his opponent's body that he often saw on Ver or Dumpy while they sparred. Su Pei's guard was simply flawless, and probing for weaknesses only opened him up for counterattacks. "All right then, since there are no openings in his guard to exploit, I must create one of my own by being creative," Leo eventually concluded, as he took a couple steps back, and decided to reset the tempo of this battle. Dash. Meanwhile, there, from a few dozen meters away, Ver observed the battle between Leo and Su Pei unfold with a perplexed expression on his face. On one hand, he did not understand why the 2 were fighting, or why it looked like the enemy commander has restricted himself to grandmaster strength to fight Leo. However, whatever the case, it did not seem like the 2 were simply chatting or plotting something sinister together to betray the cult. "Really, Valtteri, you made me come all the way out here, just for this?" There asked in annoyance, as Valtteri kept his head bowed and his expression neutral. How would you interpret this, Valtteri? I'm sure if I sent you alone to scout this place, you would come back and tell me that my cousin brother was receiving battle training from the enemy commander. Is that what you feel is going on here? There admonished, as once again, Valtteri remained quiet, not offering a word. He is the shadow dragon, Valtteri. I appreciate your cautious personality of not trusting anyone, but he's a man you can trust. If he really wanted to be dragon, he would have defeated me and taken the role at Sir Lewis Hamilton Arena. But he did not. My cousin here, I'm sure he's fighting battles you can't even understand. Ver concluded, as he went back to quietly watch the fight unfold, as he too became mesmerized by what now lay before him. Chapter 547, Unlikely Victory. The Isolated Forest, Leo vs. Su Pei. Once Leo realized that there were no obvious openings in Su Pei's fighting style, he began to experiment and innovate, as he tapped into his vast arsenal of skill moves. Astral Hook Bind. Storm Flash Traverse. First using Astral Hook Bind to restrict Su Pei's foot movements, Leo then coupled it up with Storm Flash Traverse to deliver a few high-speed slashes. However, Su Pei responded with a skill move of his own, as he used Mist Form to slip out of all those attacks. Slash, slash, slash. In the end, Leo hit nothing but the Mist Form of Su Pei's body, as the real Su Pei instead materialized from over his head. Block, stumble. Realizing that a red line of intent connected his temple, Leo noticed Su Pei's sudden descent at the last possible second, which he barely blocked before staggering backwards. Block, block, block. Somehow blocking the follow-up attacks while being down on one knee, Leo teleported out of this tough spot using Blade Switch. Swoosh, clang. Now with their positions reversed, and him being the one slashing down from above, Leo managed to make Su Pei stagger backwards. However, even then, no obvious red spots formed on his body, showing that even off balance, there were no openings left to exploit on the monarch. The fuck? How does he not have a single opening? Even Charles shows one or two once in a while. Leo wondered, not knowing that tactical defense was Su Pei's speciality. Just like versatility was Dupravel's speciality. And overwhelming power and dominance was Charles's speciality. Tactical defense was Su Pei's strong suit, and in that regard, he was the very best. Su Pei narrowed his eyes as he adjusted his grip on the hilt of his blade, the subtle shift in posture signaling a change in tempo that only a true warrior could sense. This next move, he said calmly, will be a little more serious. Whirl. With a gentle spin, his figure blurred into motion as Su Pei activated his next skill, Phantom Dash. Immediately his silhouette split into 3 flickering afterimages, each darting around Leo in a perfect triangular formation. Step, flick, slash. Each image lunged from a different direction, their blades coordinated to strike in perfect unison, forming a cage of steel and feints aimed to test not only Leo's speed, but also his composure under chaos. Shua, shua, shua. But Leo remained eerily calm. His eyes didn't chase the fakes, he simply waited, and trusted absolute vision to guide him true. At the last possible moment, he sidestepped smoothly to the left and tilted his torso ever so slightly, narrowly dodging the real Su Pei's blade that came from behind, the illusions collapsing the moment he evaded. TCH, Su Pei smirked, mildly impressed. Then take this. The air around him thickened as he raised his sword, pouring mana into a new technique, Drifting Crescent, which was a high-speed rotational slash that carried the momentum of a typhoon and the sharpness of condensed mana arcs, designed to cleave through defensive barriers and split enemies in half before they could blink. But this time, Leo didn't dodge. Instead, his eyes sharpened, body lowered, and mana surged through his arms as he activated. Full counter. Eft. A ripple of blue energy burst from his dagger the moment Su Pei's strike made contact, causing a thunderclap of raw force to explode outward as the rotational energy was absorbed, reversed, and amplified twofold. Boom. The counterattack fired back instantly, a mirror of Su Pei's own attack, but faster, sharper, and undeniably lethal. Clang. Su Pei's blade came up just in time to block it, yet even with his immense reflexes, he felt the crushing weight of the returned blow send a jolt through his wrist and shoulder, forcing him to plant one foot back into the earth to avoid being blown away. Cracks splintered beneath his boots as a gust of wind tore through the clearing. And then, silence. Su Pei blinked, his mind slowly catching up to what just happened. His fingers ached, his muscles were taut, and most importantly, he'd accidentally used transcendent tear strength just now to hold his ground. Ha! He exhaled softly, before slowly lowering his blade. A light chuckle escaped his lips as he stared at Leo, then glanced down at his own trembling palm. I accidentally tapped into transcendent tear strength and violated the terms of our battle. You win, he said honestly, before sheathing his sword in one slow, reverent motion, as Leo was left confused by how abruptly it all ended. I won, Leo asked, slightly unwilling to take the easy win, as he now felt his blood roaring for a tough fight. However, as he saw Su Pei drop his sword and tilt his head towards the sky, he understood that perhaps their rematch would have to wait until another day. You really are something else, Leo Skyshard, he murmured, more to the heavens than to Leo himself. I've never seen a more complete fighter than you at the Grandmaster tier. If you have a foundation so stable, maybe, just maybe, you can go all the way to becoming a god. He muttered, before finally looking into Leo's eyes, as he dropped to one knee. I have wasted a majority of my life pledging my loyalty to a clan that never wanted me to be a part of it. And now, I'm willing to pledge my loyalty to you. My only request in return is that, 1. I be treated with respect befitting a monarch. And 2. I be given a chance to leave a mark of my legacy on the universe. The name Su Pei has vanished from recent universal memory. I hope, after joining you, everyone is soon reminded of who I am. Su Pei requested, as Dupravel brought out the items necessary to sign a soul contract. Very well, those terms are acceptable to me, Leo said, as he began signing the soul contract procedure. Chapter 548, A Possible Quick End to Conflict. Leo completed the soul contract with Su Pei without any issues, with the terms of the contract being similar to the one he signed with Dupravel. The duration was set for 20 years, with 2 specific clauses added at Su Pei's request. Firstly, he was to be treated with dignity befitting a senior monarch within the cult. And secondly, he was never to be sent on a suicide mission without cause. Which were both conditions that Leo agreed to without much protest, since Su Pei wasn't in as desperate a situation as Dupravel when signing this deal and had in a way voluntarily chosen to come into his service. But aside from those conditions, it remained a standard master-slave contract, binding Su Pei to obey every other command he gave without exception. Master, I'll be taking my leave now. I plan to inform my forces in Fanfic City, as well as those stationed across the planet, to surrender. I hope you will honor your word and treat every soldier who lays down their arms with respect, and allow them safe passage off Coral as though they were ordinary civilians. Su Pei requested, as Leo casually waved his hand in response. Please, just call me Leo. And yes, any soldier who surrenders willingly will be treated like a civilian, no questions asked. But if anyone dares to rebel or stir chaos under the illusion of misplaced patriotism, I'll ensure they are punished without mercy. Leo replied, his voice even, as Su Pei nodded in thanks and quietly took his leave. In the end, Su Pei knew that the best he could do now was to offer his men a chance to survive, a chance to walk away from a battle already lost. And while he expected most to accept that truth, he knew that there would always be a few blinded by pride, who would refuse to surrender, and instead choose to fight even when there was nothing left to defend. And even though his heart bled for such men, he knew he couldn't help them, if they were unwilling to help themselves. All right, Viper, let's head back. I still need to figure out how I'm going to explain all this to Vare. Leo muttered, as he scratched his head in confusion. Dupravel gazed in the direction he knew Valtteri and Vare were hiding, however, said nothing, as he decided to play dumb for now. As you wish, he replied quietly, as both of them began making their way back to the Zone 1 military base. Dash 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 dash. Dupravel deliberately slowed their return to the Zone 1 military base, ensuring that Valtteri and Ver arrived ahead of them. Once back, Leo wasted no time and went straight to find Ver, eventually spotting him inside his room, slouched in a chair and gulping down a glass of water while struggling to catch his breath. "What happened to you? Why are you breathing like that?" Leo asked the moment he stepped in, only for Ver to feign confusion as he quickly tried to steady his breath and act like nothing was out of the ordinary. "Breathing like what?" Ver replied, pretending as if he hadn't just run a marathon, while Leo raised an eyebrow but decided not to press the issue further. "Well, cousin, I've got some good news, and some bad news," Leo began, as he walked over and shared everything about how Dupravel returned with Su Pei, how he ended up recruiting the enemy commander into his service, and how Su Pei now intended to order his men to surrender. As Leo spoke, Ver sat quietly with his eyes drifting lower, occasionally stealing glances toward Valtteri, who kept his gaze fixed to the ground and said nothing. "So, the good news is, the war might end much sooner than we expected, and tens of thousands of lives could be spared. The bad news is, our troops won't get the kind of battle experience they need to grow. They'll still be green, lacking the kind of exposure that forges veterans," Leo concluded, as Ver stood up and placed a firm hand on his shoulder. "There'll be other wars, cousin. And plenty of time for them to gain experience. For now, I think saving lives is more than enough. You did well today. And I agree with every promise you made," he said, his voice rising slightly at the end, clearly meant for someone else in the room and not Leo. Which once again caused Leo to raise an eyebrow. "Just what's going on here?" Leo asked again, but once more, Ver feigned ignorance. "Going on? Nothing's going on," Ver shrugged, clearly overacting now, as he walked toward the window and looked outside with his arms crossed behind his back. "Just admiring the weather." Leo narrowed his eyes slightly but let it slide for the time being. He had more important things to worry about than chasing down whatever weird game Ver and Valtteri were playing. "I'll be leaving for Fanfic City tomorrow," Leo said calmly, switching topics. "I need to oversee the surrender myself and make sure none of the majors or lieutenants under Su Pei try something foolish behind his back. Want me to come along?" Ver offered, tone returning to normal. "No. Stay here and oversee the surrender of other major cities. Keep the communications line open in case something changes. And most importantly, start preparing for the next phase of the war, which is the civilian handover and the universal messaging behind the cult takeover." Ver nodded without question, finally treating the conversation with the gravity it deserved. "Understood." Leo then turned toward Valtteri, who had silently remained in the corner the whole time, his expression unreadable. "I don't know what happened to you today, but keep Ver safe. The next few days are when his life should be under maximum threat from those who want to kill him." "As you command, Lord Shadow Dragon," Valtteri replied, his head bowing slightly. With nothing more to say, Leo took one last look at his cousin, then quietly walked out of the room. If everything went as he planned, the conquest of planet Coral might come to a successful conclusion within the next 10 to 14 days. Chapter 549, Surrender. Fanfic City, Central Command Square. The skies above Fanfic were cloudy, dull with streaks of gray, as if the heavens themselves mirrored the emotion felt by the soldiers assembled below. Thousands of men and women in uniform stood at the central square, faces hardened from past 48 hours of taxing conflict, some standing with eyes hollow from the deaths of friends and commanders. And in front of them, stood Su Pei. He was still in his armor, its once pristine plates now scorched and scratched from his duel with Dupravel, but his composure remained as regal as ever. He looked at them, his soldiers, his people, many of whom had followed him since the earliest days of Coral's planetary defense. And now, with his decision already made to surrender, he stood before them with his head hung low. "My soldiers, you do not need to die for a cause that is already lost," he began, his voice calm but powerful. "There are no reinforcements coming from the Su clan. They have deemed planet Coral to be a lost cause, and without their support, It's impossible for us to hold out against the vastly superior cult forces. Su Pei continued, walking slowly across the front line, his eyes meeting those of captains, medics, field scouts, and snipers alike. I have carefully considered all courses of action. I have considered staying back and fighting till my last breath. I have considered running away from this planet on a private jet. And I have considered surrender. And after thinking all of the options through, I have arrived at the conclusion that the best course of action is for us to stand down. No one moved. No one breathed. I've spoken directly with the cult's leader. I've looked into the eyes of the shadow dragon himself, and made my vow as a soldier and a monarch, he said, voice growing louder now. I have secured a binding contract that guarantees safety. Every soldier who surrenders now will be treated with dignity. They will not be harmed. They will be allowed to leave this planet as civilians. Still, the silence held. I know the stories you've heard. I know the fear that lives in your bones. But I am not asking you to trust the cult. I am asking you to trust me. His voice softened at the end, but its weight did not. From within the front line, a murmur started. Low, uncertain, as a young woman lowered her head and bit her lip, tears quietly falling down her cheeks. Then came the backlash. Lies. A voice screamed, hoarse with rage. You expect us to believe the cult will just let us go. They'll kill us like dogs the moment we kneel. A man pushed his way to the front, face red with fury, insignia of a lieutenant on his shoulder. They brainwashed you, he yelled, finger pointing at Su Pei. They broke you in battle and now you want us to follow your cowardice. We're soldiers. Our duty is to fight for our homeland till our last breath. He turned to the men beside him. If you have any spine left, you'll fight. With or without orders. A few heads lowered. Others clenched their fists. But then, someone else responded. Shut up, Kieran. The voice came from the left flank. A grizzled corporal. His voice was hoarse and his stare was cold. You want to die. Then die alone. But don't drag the rest of us into your delusion. Kieran blinked, caught off guard, as the corporal stepped forward and placed his weapon on the ground. I trust the commander. And if he says it's safe to surrender, then I believe him. He raised both his hands above his head and began walking slowly toward the city's border checkpoint, hoping that he wouldn't be killed along the way. One by one, others followed. Some silent, some in tears, some staring at the ground as if they could not believe this was the end. But they followed. Weapons clattered to the floor like thunder, one after the other, the sound echoing across the base like a final salute. Not everyone moved. Some stood frozen, trembling with shame or guilt. Others stayed rooted in place, their pride still too strong to bend. But the tide had already shifted. Even the loudest skeptics felt their words fade into silence, swallowed by the sheer number of those choosing to live. Su Pei did not smile. He simply watched them walk. Shoulders slumped, hands raised, weapons abandoned. They were not deserters. They were not cowards. They were survivors. And he, above all, had given them the permission to live. From a nearby rooftop, Leo stood with his arms crossed, watching the steady stream of surrendering soldiers walk toward the checkpoint, as a quiet respect stirred within him for Su Pei. The man had chosen to bear the burden of shame so his men wouldn't have to, and that humility he displayed made Leo appreciate him as an ally. He's a good man. Unlike you, Viper, his heart is not actually black. Leo said, as Dupravel who stood behind him in guard chuckled at his words. Aw man, does this mean I won't get to fight Lord Father? I was really looking forward to letting loose today. Dumpy complained, as Leo silently tickled the underside of his chin, but said nothing. He continued to observe the situation, and just how many men chose to leave, as he decided to give them a few more hours to make up their mind. Don't worry Dumpy, I can already spot a few stubborn fools who are picking up the weapons dropped by others. They'll receive no mercy from us if they continue to walk down this path. Leo said, as he promised Dumpy a battle with the fools who chose to stay back. All right then, I too was itching for a fight. Ben said beside him, as Leo looked towards his robot master and smiled. In the end, it seemed like only he and Dumpy were secretly hoping some soldiers would choose pride over surrender, just so they'd have a reason to kill them themselves. Chapter 550, Progress in Understanding Emotions. Leo's paw, from the ledge of a high-rise rooftop. Leo quietly observed the soldiers below with piqued curiosity, as he granted them a couple hours to decide whether they wished to stay back or surrender. For him, this moment served as the perfect opportunity to delve deeper into the sevenfold Revelation Codex. As never before had he witnessed so many people feel so much, all at once, because in this precise window, where countless souls wrestled between duty and self-preservation, pride and survival, the emotions surging within them began leaking into the world in waves, causing the aura around their bodies to shift with almost every passing thought. Nearly every soldier he saw was cloaked in either maroon, red, or blue, with those colors flickering, intensifying, and dimming as their inner conflicts grew louder. And for the first time in his life, Leo could distinguish not just the familiar gradients of red, but the subtle shades within maroon and blue as well, as he unlocked the meaning behind the various layers of those colors that had always eluded him until now. Almost every soldier he observed began their emotional spiral wrapped in the maroon shade, a color that symbolized frustration. And so, it came as no surprise that nearly every man and woman, as they threw away their weapons, appeared cloaked in some variation of brown, before then slowly shifting into either red or blue. The ones who managed to accept the truth of their circumstances, and found it within themselves to feel grateful for being given a chance to walk away from this conflict with their lives intact, began to radiate shades of blue. They smiled as they walked. They had tears of joy in their eyes. And more than anger, they seemed relieved that this war was finally over. On the other hand, those who could not come to terms with the outcome, and instead sank into self-pity and hatred for having chosen to surrender, gradually turned red, overwhelmed by a destructive urge to lash out at everything and everyone around them. These were the soldiers who cursed the heavens for their fate. The ones who asked, "Why must I surrender so humiliatingly? Why won't the Sioux clan come to our rescue? Why can't we win this war against the cult?" They were not thinking about making peace with what they had, but instead clung to what they wished had been, placing all their resentment on destiny and the cards they had been dealt. As a soldier, Leo found himself respecting this second group more, because at the very least, they felt guilt over surrendering, and carried some pride in their identity as warriors. But as people, he respected the first group far more. He could see it clearly in their eyes, that these were the ones who would live long, happy, and prosperous lives. Their ability to live in the present, to find gratitude even in loss, made them the kind of people others wanted to be around. Though, from a soldier's perspective, they were a disgrace. It's interesting how I can almost discern their whole personality based on this one episode. My mastery over the codex is truly expanding, as although I don't know what the different shades of blue and maroon are supposed to mean for sure, I have a strong intuition as to what it should be. Leo thought, as for the first time in his life, he could discern the meaning behind the colors he observed without having to cross-check with the codex. On one hand, there were countless shades of every color to count, and when observing thousands of people at once, almost every shade was visible. But for his own simplicity, Leo broadly categorized maroon and blue into three distinct shades: base, light and dark. For maroon, which signified frustration, the base shade appeared most often. It pulsed around the average soldier, the one who felt bitter over the surrender, but whose emotions hadn't yet spiraled out of control. The light maroon, in contrast, had a faded, almost copper-like quality, and Leo believed it belonged to those who were frustrated, but not at anyone in particular. Their disappointment was rooted in circumstance. They were upset that they had lost, upset that their efforts had been wasted, but they held no deep anger in their hearts. Then came the dark maroon, which clung to soldiers like rusted iron. Heavy and oppressive, and Leo associated this with those whose frustration had begun to turn inward. They blamed themselves, their commanders, the heavens, and was the kind of emotion that fermented into resentment and could, at any moment, tip into something far more dangerous. As for blue, the color of hope and joy, Leo categorized that into three shades as well. The base shade of blue was soft, almost serene. And as per his understanding, it hovered over those who felt joy and relief for not having to fight in this war, while the lighter shade hovered around those who were just happy that this mess was over, so that they could start a new chapter of their life. Conversely, the darker shade of blue lingered around those who were truly happy to be alive, or were very hopeful about their future since they survived this war. It seems like the lighter shade shows a lesser intensity of the emotion, while a darker shade shows a higher intensity. It was the same for killing intent, and it seems to be the same for other colors. Leo concluded, as after noticing a familiar pattern, he devised an educated guess of his own. All right, we have given them enough time to surrender. The ones who still haven't made up their minds can all be labeled as the enemy, Leo said at the end, as he felt satisfied with having given everyone a fair chance to leave. The ones who still lingered had only red auras covering their bodies. And they were the ones he felt no inkling to show any mercy. Master Ben, Viper, Dumpy, time to go wild. Let's send these fools to the afterlife while they don't expect it. Leo ordered, as he unsheathed his dagger and jumped down from the rooftop. Chapter 551, Massacre. The poor souls who chose to stay back and fight never even got the chance to see the face of the enemy that sent them to the afterlife. Dumpy, Leo, Ben, and Dupravel moved through the battlefield like incarnations of death himself, each killing the resisting soldiers quicker and more mercilessly than the other. Dupravel alone was responsible for over 100 casualties every minute, his aura unleashing violent ripples that paralyzed enemy movement before his daggers shredded through their necks, chests, and skulls with ruthless precision. Being the only Monarch-tier fighter on the battlefield, Dupravel moved through the battlefield unchallenged, with dozens dropping dead with every step he took. Similarly, Leo had a nearly identical effect on the battlefield around him, as he too glided through the masses without trouble, with his ability to perceive killing intent and the weaknesses in his opponents, making it easy for him to reap their lives. But while he and Dupravel moved in silence, Dumpy and Ben made a big scene wherever they went. With a sword in each hand and highly corrosive acid dripping from his joints, Dumpy danced through the battlefield with an eerie sort of rhythm, his blades cleaving through bone and armor in a single stroke. He specifically targeted the strongest opponents, who were the Transcendent tier lieutenants or the Grandmaster tier captains, while constantly hurling insults at them. "You're nothing but a mongrel human in front of me. How dare you mongrels reject Lord Father's kindness to spare your lives and choose to rebel? Now pay for your sins." Dumpy yelled, as he showed absolutely no mercy to any human that came before him. Those that tried to block him lost their arms. Those that tried to run lost their legs. While those that stood still died the quickest. The scent of burnt flesh followed him wherever he went, as not only did he kill his opponents, but he also burnt their corpses, just because he could. Finally, Ben flew overhead with his new robotic body, darting through the sky like a metallic phantom. His inbuilt aiming system helped him launch throwing daggers with guided precision, while his legs spun with reinforced boosters, allowing him to rotate midair and switch angles seamlessly. His daggers curved through the wind, slicing throats and piercing skulls before most common soldiers could even raise their shields. When Ben wasn't busy flying, he found himself crashing into enemy formations like a meteor, bones crunching beneath his steel-plated limbs as he stabbed downwards through chests with dual-arm blades. Every time a soldier tried to wound him, he charged straight through the blade, completely unaffected by pain, his laughter robotic and cold. A man stabbed him in the side of the head, but he did not so much as flinch. He simply grabbed the man's arm, broke it, and then used the shattered bone to stab the man in the eye. As being a robotic man, he did not feel things like physical pain. Even when his torso was impaled with a spear from behind, he didn't stop moving. He just twisted his body around, snapped the spear, and tore the attacker's head clean off with a brutal roundhouse. To him, who had no fear of losing his life, this war was nothing more than a fun game, as he fought with a reckless sort of abandon. An hour soon passed, and the sounds of the clashes began to die down, as Dupravel alone seemed to have claimed the lives of over 6,000 soldiers, with Leo, Dumpy, and Ben having killed 6,000 more. At this point, only a few dozen injured soldiers were left alive, and even they seemed to have nothing but pure horror in their eyes. At this moment, Leo could see many of them deeply regretting their decision to stay back and fight, but he showed them no mercy. As men they had consciously decided to lay in this bed. So he made sure they slept in it. Meanwhile, there. A few hours after Leo and his crew completed their cleanup of Fanfic City, Ver shifted his attention toward securing the surrender of the remaining military leaders. He informed the other majors stationed in key cities about Supei's surrender and offered them and their men the same terms that were extended in Fanfic City. If they laid down their arms now, their lives would be spared, and they would be treated with dignity. As a result, Ver successfully negotiated a full surrender from troops stationed at zonal bases 2, 4, 7, and 9, along with a partial surrender from those stationed at bases 3, 5, 6, 10, 11, and 12. At this point, nearly 60% of the remaining resistance forces had already surrendered, leaving only around 100,000 to 200,000 rebels scattered across the planet. Once the updated surrender reports were logged, Ver stood at the center of the command deck aboard his and Leo's destroyer ship, calmly observing as several projection screens lit up with the faces of his Legion commanders across planet Coral. "We've already negotiated the surrender of 60% of enemy troops without unnecessary bloodshed," Ver said, his voice even and composed. "But those who still resist us cannot be allowed to linger." Several heads nodded in silent agreement. "I want every remaining base to receive one final message," he continued. "Inform them that Fanfic City has fallen. Zone 1 is now fully under cult control. Let them know that by tomorrow morning, their former commander Supei will fight under our banner, so tonight is their last opportunity to surrender." He paused, giving weight to the silence that followed. "This is our final olive branch. Eliminate everyone who refuses to accept it." There was no anger behind his words, only calm determination. "This campaign must end within the next 4 to 7 days. We move swiftly. We move cleanly. We have shown compassion, even when it was not deserved. Now we show strength, where strength is needed. You all joined my army of your own free will. Now it is time to bring me glory," Ver concluded, as the commanders saluted in sequence, absorbing every word he spoke with unwavering resolve. Chapter 552, Good Negotiations. Planet Coral, 7 days later. Over the next 7 days, the cult army soldiers secured one strategic victory after another, eventually overwhelming the enemy through sheer numbers alone, as they gained complete control over every major city on the planet. With only a couple 100,000 rebelling troops for them to confront, progress across all battlefronts was made swiftly, while loss of life remained minimal, as the Dragon's army succeeded in their first planetary conquest. "Lord Dragon, I'm proud to report that the conquest of Delta City is now complete. With this, the entire planet is now firmly under your command, my lord," Legion Commander Gara reported, as Ver clenched his fists in joy. Coral's planetary conquest had proven to be much smoother than they could have ever hoped, with total personnel lost on the cult side amounting to only about 40,000 men, far less than the initial estimate of 300 to 500,000. "What do you think, cousin? Is it time to contact the righteous faction yet, or no, or do you think us contacting them first will give us a weaker position in negotiations?" Ver asked, as Leo lazily popped a fresh grape into his mouth. "You're the dragon, cuz, not me. Some decisions you must take on your own," Leo replied, taking no interest in the back-end politics that followed the end of a war. "Well, they have opened a communication line with planet Tithia, but I don't want to consult the First Elder on this. Ideally, I requested a direct line to Juxta, but the Elders' Council rejected it. They said if it's urgent, they would reroute the call. So I can't connect with Commander Charles without talking to the Elders first." Ver complained, as Leo simply laughed at his words. The pettiness of the Elders' Council no longer surprised him. Those idiots went to unbelievably long lengths to ensure nobody one-upped them when the time came to claim credit. "Like I said, this is your headache to handle. In the end, I was only here as your helper. It's you and your army that won this war. And it's you that will handle all the headaches that come with it. Leo reiterated, as with a long sigh. Ver walked out of the room, already making up his mind to call the universal government and begin the first round of negotiation procedures. The Dragon's personal ship, the command deck. A couple of female soldiers quickly turned into part-time makeup artists as they straightened Ver's ceremonial robes and applied the final touch-up to his eyebrows and nose, to make him look intimidating and regal. A few minutes earlier, under Ver's instructions, contact had been established with the Sioux clan and the universal government. They were informed of Planet Coral's capture and instructed to prepare for a negotiation dialogue set to begin in 2 hours. Ver requested that they send a representative with full authority to negotiate, as he stood at his most imposing, ready to receive the call. Ring ring, ring ring. The communication panel beeped, as Ver gave a silent nod and signaled for his underlings to accept the call. Shua. The communication channel flickered to life, a swirling blue hologram forming in the air before Ver, as it revealed the smirking face of a triangle-faced warrior adorned in glistening universal government uniform. His posture was relaxed, his arms folded behind his back, and his smile was sharp enough to cut. "You must be the newest dragon of the cult," the man said, voice dripping with mockery. "Their new messiah, also known as the latest pig for us to slaughter." Ha 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 ha. He gave a dramatic bow, full of theatrical flair. "I'm Commander Entrail. I'll be handling these negotiations." Ver didn't respond to the insult. He merely raised an eyebrow, clasped his hands behind his back, and spoke with the calm authority of someone who didn't feel the need to posture. "This is a formal communication to notify the universal government that Planet Coral is now fully under cult control. I am here to begin the hostage transfer procedure and negotiate the price of every life you wish to buy back." Hostage transfer. "Oh, my," Entrail said with a mocking gasp. "I suppose I should be terrified. And tell me, what ransom does the great cult of Ascension demand?" He leaned closer to the hologram, eyes gleaming with sarcasm. 1 megapixel per life. That way, if we pay for all 250 million civilians, you lot might finally scrape together enough to upgrade from those third-rate robes you call uniforms. He burst into laughter at his own joke, doubling over slightly, hands on his knees. Ver remained motionless. 10,000 megapixels, he replied coldly, causing Entrail to blink, and then smirk. 10,000 total. Sure. That sounds like a generous offer for some crusty prisoners. He chuckled again, clearly trying to provoke, as he burst out laughing once more. Clench. Ver felt his fingers twitch in anger, but his face stayed neutral. If he weren't handling this call in the official capacity of the dragon, he would have already lashed out, but for the sake of the cult, he remained calm. "Strike 1, he warned gently, as Entrail tilted his head in response. "Ooh, I'm so scared. What are you gonna do when we hit strike 3? Send an attack over the holographic channel." Entrail mocked, however, Ver didn't answer. Instead, he pointed behind himself toward a small, visible recording device mounted on the wall. "No, I won't send an attack over hologram," he said coolly. "But I will send this video to every neutral planet and all your superiors in the righteous faction. I'll show them how their esteemed Commander Entrail conducts himself like a clown." Entrail's grin faltered, ever so slightly. The last negotiated rate between the cult and the righteous faction was 1000 megapixels per life 33 years ago. "You insult me with an offer of just 1. Right now, you're acting as nothing more than a clown who belittles his own negotiation protocol and behaves like a jester." Ver took a step closer, voice lowering but growing sharper. "So go ahead. Keep playing the fool. I'll see to it that everyone in the cult, and all my friends in neutral systems, come to know you as Entrail the Clown. I trust that title will suit someone of your temperament." Entrail's jaw clenched. The amusement in his eyes began to fade. Like most monarch-level warriors, he held his pride sacred. And although he was playing the role of the fool to rouse his opponent and garner a reaction, he never really wanted his own reputation to be spoiled. 2,000 a life, he said flatly. 3,000, Ver countered without pause. A beat of silence passed. 2,500, Entrail muttered. Not a single MP more. Deal, Ver said, offering a cold smile. Entrail didn't respond. He merely reached forward and ended the call, the hologram fizzling into sparks. Ver exhaled, then turned to his attendants. Prepare the prisoner transport list. Begin sorting by age and medical condition. Prioritize older civilians and those with medical conditions to evacuate first. We are not inhumane, we won't keep them here to die. He ordered, as he began walking out of the ship with a big smile on his face. These negotiations went much better than he expected. Since he was initially willing to settle for just 1,000, walking away with 2,500 felt like a heist. Chapter 553, Aftermath. The news about the Dragon Army's victory on planet Coral spread fast and wide across the universe. Once the official hostage transfer procedure began, and millions were evacuated out of planet Coral day after day, the war stories and how efficiently the cult took control of the planet began to float across the righteous faction. At first, the upper brass remained quiet, attempting to downplay the situation and frame it as a strategic setback rather than a true loss. But once the images of the cult flag being raised in Sanfi City went viral, and the confirmed surrender of Commander Su Pei was published in the official bulletin, panic began to spread like wildfire. Forums, hollow channels, encrypted chat rooms, and live feeds buzzed with a mixture of disbelief, fury, and dread. Dark times. We live in dark times. They say the new dragon Aegon Ver is a ruthless strategist. He conquered a border planet in 7 days, just 7. Those bastards have grown stronger in peace times. What was the Su clan doing? How could they let themselves be fooled by the cult so bad? I heard they pulled out half their forces after being deceived that the attack was actually happening on planet Nemo instead of Coral. Did you hear? The Su family commander surrendered to the cult, and has now become their slave. I heard they used some sort of brainwashing technique to force him to change his allegiance, and then bound him using a soul contract. The cult gaining another monarch can't be good. They'll become even more bold now. I heard that the shadow dragon Leo Skyshard also played a role in this victory. He was once hailed as a prodigy of the righteous. It's a shame to see just how far he's fallen. Every network, both open and encrypted, had its own version of events, yet the core facts remained unchanged. Planet Coral had fallen, not after months of siege, not after a drawn-out attrition war, but within a single week, through a series of surgical strikes that left even experienced generals speechless. What was once considered a secure border stronghold that remained unchallenged for centuries, had now suddenly fallen in under a week, and nothing terrified the common people more than this newfound proof of cult competence. Meanwhile, inside the Su clan, the atmosphere within the ancestral halls of the Su clan was tense, not because the cult had claimed victory, but because one of their own had defected. News of Su Pei's surrender had arrived 3 days ago, but today, it became official. Holographic proof of him kneeling before the dragon as he held his victory speech on planet Coral became viral on the Galaxy Net social media. The clan elders said nothing. The junior members whispered only behind locked doors, as no one dared to confront the truth aloud. Except for one. So, that traitor finally showed his true colors. Su Tang said, his voice low as he sipped from a tall crystal glass of blood-red wine. I always knew he was a snake. That's why I sent him to a planet that doesn't matter at all. Imagine if I put him up to something important, what a blow would that have been to the clan. The group surrounding him, dressed in formal robes and polished shoes, nodded without a word, their faces expressionless, their backs stiff. None dared contradict him. No one tried to suggest that he may be wrong to arrive at this conclusion. Because although every single one of them knew the truth was anything but what the patriarch claimed, none of them had the courage to say it aloud. Meanwhile, Su Yong, Rodova Military Academy. In a quiet corner of the Rodova dormitory courtyard, away from the murmuring crowds of students, Su Yong sat alone beneath the shadow of a curved iron arch. A single newspaper rested in his hand, folded once along the middle, its headline screaming across the front. Greater than, planet coral falls in 7 days, the evil cult claims total victory. But it wasn't the headline that made his fingers tighten. It was the fine print at the bottom of the second column. Greater than, the Shadow Dragon, Leo Skyshard, confirmed to have participated in the campaign. His eyes remained fixed on that line for a long time, his jaw tense, his breathing shallow, before he slowly folded the paper inwards, crumpling it into a tight ball. With one smooth motion, he stood up and tossed it into the trash bin beside him. His gaze hardened, his thoughts unreadable. And then, without another word, he walked away. Meanwhile, within the cult-controlled territories, the atmosphere within the cult was in complete contrast to what the rest of the universe was feeling, as the euphoria surrounding the dragon's first successful conquest was simply indescribable. After centuries of being boxed in, after decades of slow, silent growth in the shadows, the cult finally had a victory worth parading through the streets. And so, that's exactly what happened. Banners of the Dragon Army were hoisted over every government square and training courtyard, with massive crystal projectors screening scenes from the conquest, as they displayed the highlight reels of the lightning-fast battles and the now iconic image of Dragon Bear raising the cult insignia atop the planetary command tower. Street performers and fire breathers lit up every block, singing tales of the dragon's might, while children played with wooden daggers and mock rubber swords, mimicking the battlefield footage as they screamed his name. Aegon Ver, the great dragon, the conqueror of Coral. Even those who previously held doubts about the Dragon Army's competency, now found themselves swept away by the celebration. Statues were commissioned to be built in Ver's honor, not just on planet Ixtal, but across all cult planets, as the local leadership decided to honor his victory in whatever small way they could, like by naming a street square for him, or adding a grand statue of him as a part of their planet's history. TV channels constantly replayed snippets of Ver's victory speech and broadcast daily updates about the evacuation efforts that were still underway. Anchors and analysts praised Ver's leadership, and how he managed to achieve victory with a staggeringly low death count of just 40,000 lives lost in total, as they branded him as a new age military genius. "He's a genius, I tell you," one analyst proclaimed loudly, banging his fist across his desk on live TV. Not even 2 months into his role as the dragon, and he's already won his first world. "What do you think he'll take next?" "I've already submitted my name for enlistment," his partner said. "No way I'm missing out on the next conquest. I've put in my notice to quit, and have decided to join the Dragon's army before their next deployment." He wasn't the only one to echo this sentiment, as across the cult territories, the amount of people who wished to enlist in the Dragon's army spiked significantly after this campaign. It was the first time in living memory for most citizens that they got a chance to celebrate not a prophecy, not a doctrine, not a sermon of vengeance, but a true, undeniable triumph. And it was exactly the kind of taste they had been denied for far too long and hence relished like there was no tomorrow. Chapter 554, Time to Break Free. Beneath the surface-level reactions, the true consequences of the Dragon Army's emphatic victory on planet Coral had already begun to ripple through the deeper political currents of the universe. The cult of Ascension's rise was a common problem for everyone belonging to the Righteous Alliance, which included the 6 great clans as well as the universal government. And no one felt the weight of that problem more heavily than the founding gods themselves. Inside a dimly lit, sanctum-like chamber, meant to only be used to hold emergency meetings, Su-Ren sat alone on a throne of polished marble. Before him were 5 holographic projections of his counterparts, each one seated upon their own throne, their figures stabilized by ancient projection runes that only the founding gods could access. Mu Shen of the Mu clan. Du Trask of the Du clan. Lu Han of the Lu clan. Ru Vasa of the Ru clan. And Yu Kiro of the Yu clan. All the 6 founding gods were present for this meeting, but none of them seemed to be willing to speak first, as they all just kept staring into each other's eyes without uttering a single word. Sigh. Eventually, it was Su Ren who exhaled slowly and leaned forward, his voice cold but measured. "We all know why we're here," he said, as he alternated his gaze between all of them. "The cult's new dragon is a problem, he has the makings of the next timeless assassin in him," Su Ren said, as his words immediately caused an uproar amongst his peers. "Oh, there he goes again. This guy. Can you believe him? Isn't that the same garbage that he said about Noah Ashburn? And now what? Noah's dead just like the rest of the cult's previous dragons. The ancient prophecy is a farce. The timeless assassin died 2200 years ago. We killed him ourselves," Yukiro complained, as he threw up his hands in disbelief. "The cult's no longer a threat. It's just Soren. After the timeless assassin's death, we have systematically dismantled the cult and its ability to be a universal power. The current cult of Ascension has what? One god, no demigods and one monarch in their upper echelons. They're no longer a universal power. We can crush them any time we want, if it weren't for Soren," Luhan said, as the others nodded in agreement. "What we need to focus on is how to decouple with the universal government. This is not the time to focus on the cult. We have been planning to break free from the universal government's influence for over 500 years now. I think it's time we put our money where our mouths are and do it. At the next conclave, let's put up a united front and tell those three that we will no longer serve under them," Dutrask said, as his words gave way to more chaos and tension. "We can't break free from the Righteous Alliance yet. Not while the cult of Ascension is still a threat. Not while Soren is still alive. Do any of you have the confidence to face that monster alone? 'Cause I sure as hell don't. You might have forgotten how ferocious he was, but I remember it like it was yesterday. After the timeless assassin, Soren's the second best fighter I've ever seen in my life," Ruvasa pointed out, as she suggested that they not make any rash decisions at this point in time. "You don't understand, Ru, that's how Morris gets us. It's the threat of Soren and the cult that binds this righteous alliance together. Why do you think Kalith has never taken out those origin metal blades in the past 2 millennium? Why do you think the three of them haven't killed Soren yet? Because they know damn well that the moment the cult is no longer a threat, they'll have nothing to keep us under control. This is all a ploy, why can't you see it?" Dutrask argued, as the discussion devolved into chaos once more. The 6 great clans had long yearned to break free from the Righteous Alliance, where their position beneath the universal government resembled that of glorified vassals. Yet somehow, the timing never aligned. Every time they inched toward independence, the cult and its newly appointed dragon stirred unrest, forcing them to turn to the universal government for military support, thereby chaining them to the alliance for a few more years. Now, however, after centuries of waiting, the 6 great clans were finally on the verge of severing ties. They had even internally agreed to formally notify Morris, Kalith, and Helmuth of their decision at the next conclave. But just as they prepared to make their big move, the cult's new dragon had once again begun to disrupt everything. The timing behind all this is too suspicious. I refuse to believe that the cult made no moves for the past 3 decades, but suddenly appointed a new dragon right before we were about to break free. I firmly believe this is Morris's doing. The deceiver is making us all dance like marionettes on a string," Mu Shen said, as his words upset almost everyone. No god in this room liked Morris even slightly, however, they all feared him nonetheless. "I propose that we change nothing. So what if the Su clan lost 1 planet? I'm sure it's not a big deal in the grand scheme of things. What's more important is to secure our independence. The universal government has dictated their terms on how to run our land long enough. I think it's about time we tell them to fuck off," Yukiro said, as everyone in the room but Ruvasa nodded. "I'm telling you all, the timing is not right. A couple more centuries and Soren will die. We can make our move then. Right now it's too soon," Ru pleaded. However, nobody in the room paid any attention to her words. It was exactly concerns like these that had blinded them to this unfair alliance for over 2 millennia. But in the eyes of the other 5, it was time to now break free. Chapter 555, Summons. Planet Tithia. Leo returned to Tithia soon after the hostage transfer procedure began, for by then there was nothing more he could add to the war effort. Su Pei, Dupravel, Ben, and Dumpy accompanied him, completely unaware that their entry would cause a massive headache for the Elders' Council. It was only after their arrival on Tithia that the Elders' Council finally learned about the exact circumstances behind Su Pei's surrender. Naturally, they were rendered speechless when they found out that Su Pei had not surrendered to the cult at all, but had bound himself through a master-slave contract to Leo personally, at which point many of them were left flabbergasted. This is absolutely outrageous. The Shadow Dragon now has 2 Monarch-tier warriors working for him. At this rate he will become more powerful than the cult forces. In fact, he may soon begin acting the same way as Charles, who we can't rein in. The first elder complained, as almost everyone within the council agreed to his view. But it's not like we can punish him either. After all, he's breaking no laws per se. If anything, he did the cult a big service by making a formidable enemy commander submit to him. The 7th elder argued, as the others found themselves in a moral dilemma. On one hand, they had no grounds to reprimand Leo for his actions, however, on the other hand, they did not appreciate this development even slightly. Being the greedy politicians that they were, they couldn't fathom the idea of anyone having more power than they did, which was why Leo's growing influence alarmed them all. Well, elections are just a few months away. Right now is not the right time to antagonize the Shadow Dragon or launch a politically risky move against him. But, after the elections are settled, we must find a way to put checks and balances against that boy. The 4th elder suggested, as almost everyone present on the conference call hummed in agreement. Yes, for now, let's just push him into training, so he doesn't have time to think about anything else. I suggest we send him to the 2nd elder, to learn the forbidden technique that Ver already knows. We can even use the excuse of Ver currently being tied up in the war cleanup to be the perfect time for his solo training. The 12th elder suggested, as once again everyone muttered in agreement. All right, it's settled then, send out an executive order to the Shadow Dragon. Inform him that he's to report for training tomorrow morning on planet Morid. The 1st elder said, as the conference call finally ended. Leo's POV. Leo had barely set foot back on Tithia, when without even a moment to breathe or rest, an order arrived for him to report to planet Morid for training the very next day. The fuck? I haven't even had the chance to tell my girlfriend I'm alive and back. Why can't they wait a day or two? He muttered, his frustration spilling over, as Ben placed a reassuring hand on his shoulder and smiled. Don't worry, my boy. I've been sending Amanda clippings of you being alive almost every day. With my body this battered, I'm heading back to Vorthas for repairs anyway, so I'll make sure to pass the message. Leo exhaled heavily, letting some of the tension drain away. Su Pei, if you don't mind, follow Ben to my house for a few days. My brother has been through quite the ordeal recently, and I think you're the right person to oversee his recovery. Su Pei raised an eyebrow but gave no objection. Normally, a warrior of his stature would never lower himself to such menial work, but this was his first time within cult territory, and he found himself curious to explore it through civilian eyes. I don't mind. I'll do as you please, Master, Su Pei replied, as he earned a small smile from Leo. Arriving in Tithia, Su Pei was immediately struck by how advanced and well organized the cult cities were. Contrary to what the righteous faction drilled into its people, these were not barbaric lands drowning in filth and chaos. The streets were clean, infrastructure modern, and the common folk went about their lives with a sense of pride and belonging. It was in complete contrast to what the righteous faction wanted its citizens to believe, for back there, the universal government wasted no time flooding its citizens with carefully tailored propaganda. Across every hollow screen, news anchor, and official channel, the cult was painted as a hellscape, its cities portrayed as crumbling slums, its air heavy with disease, and its soldiers as cruel slave masters who whipped and starved their workers into submission. Grainy, exaggerated footage was played on repeat, gaunt figures dragging heavy loads through muddy streets, armed overseers standing ready with whips, and children dressed in rags begging for scraps. The narrative was clear: life under the cult was misery incarnate, and only the righteous alliance could stand between their citizens and such horrors. The truth, however, was far more complicated, and for men like Su Pei, setting foot on Tithia was all it took to realize just how deep the universal government's lies truly ran. He had always expected the videos to be fake and exaggerated to some degree, since the cult did possess technology and weapons that did not seem like something slum dwellers should have. However, he wasn't sure about it until he landed on Tithia. Only now, after seeing the cult territory with his own eyes, did he truly realize that the evil cult was never really evil, as he found his curiosity being piqued as to what the culture around here really was. Su Pei wanted to learn as to what other lies he was fed, which was why he accepted the role of a simple overseer, which would allow him a lot of leisure time to explore the cult and its real culture at his own pace. "What about me, Lord Father? What do I do?" Dumpy asked, as Leo gave him an apologetic smile and a consoling head pat. "I'm sorry, Dumpy, but you're going straight back to Juxta, to train under Charles," Leo said apologetically, as Dumpy immediately turned a few shades pale. The poor frog really did not wish to go back under Charles and begged for Leo to not send him away. However, after seeing his growth under Charles's training, Leo decided to be harsh and send him back regardless of his protests, as he needed Dumpy to become the strongest version of himself that he possibly could. Chapter 556, First Tattoo. Planet Morit, the central jail house. After arriving on Planet Morit, home of the Second Elder, Leo was surprised to be summoned to the central jailhouse, which he felt was an unusual place to begin his training. He was escorted through the crowded prison, where he passed by rows of cramped cells, the faint stench of blood, sweat and grime entering his nose. Clink, clink. Every step that he took along the iron-floored corridor was accompanied by the dull echo of chains clinking together, as prisoners peered out from behind rusted bars with hollow, resentful eyes. Most of them were not common criminals. Their posture and hardened gazes spoke of years spent on battlefields, yet now they were reduced to living in filth, their hair matted, skin pale, and bodies weakened from malnourishment. Some cursed him in hushed tones, while others simply stared in silence, too weak to even throw insults. Leo could tell that many of them were captured spies or high-value enemies of the cult, who were stripped of their pride and left to rot in this place. However, he did not spare them even the slightest sympathetic glance. Step, step. Soon, he descended down a flight of stairs, the air around him growing colder and more humid, until eventually he reached the second basement floor, where the execution rooms were located. Here, the atmosphere was heavier, almost suffocating. The hallway walls were lined with thick steel doors, each marked by deep scratches, as if desperate hands had clawed at them in their final moments. The faint scent of old poison lingered in the air, a grim reminder of what these rooms were built for. And at the very end of this second-floor basement, in an open room, the Second Elder waited, standing beside a man who could only be described as a tattoo artist of the most intimidating kind. The mystery man's skin was covered in dark, intricate tattoos from neck to wrist, the patterns twisting like living serpents under the basement light. A massive, ring-shaped earring hung from each ear, swaying slightly as he turned his head to look at Leo. "Is this the boy?" he asked, as the Second Elder replied with a quiet nod, before gesturing to Leo to come take a seat. In the center of the room sat a heavy metal chair, one that Leo recognized immediately. It was the kind used to restrain inmates before they were sedated and executed, a slow and painful poison coursing through their veins until their hearts stopped. However, the execution system had been pushed into the far corner of the room, its tubes and needles disconnected. In its place, a tattoo setup had been arranged, complete with sterile tools, ink containers, and a faintly glowing array carved into the table beside it. *BZZZZTTT. The buzzing hum of the tattoo needle filled the air, as any lingering doubts Leo had about what might happen next vanished completely when he heard that sound. Sigh. Letting out a deep breath, he slid his robe from his shoulders and let it fall around his waist, sitting down on the chair with his upper body bare. To learn my technique, you first need to receive the mark of Paranthrak, the ancient death god. Do not worry, Ver has received it as well, and so have I, the second elder said as he pulled back his own robe, revealing the gleaming tattoo covering half his body, identical to the one Ver bore. This man here is the supreme runic expert, Mykonos. He is one of only 2 supreme runic encryption experts alive in the universe. Commander Charles personally kidnapped him from the protection of the righteous faction about 50 years ago. He was originally a dweller of a neutral planet, the second elder introduced, as Leo gave the supreme artist a respectful bow. Chuckle. The tattooed man let out a low chuckle as he adjusted Leo's posture, beginning to mark the rough outline of the tattoo across his body. The other boy I tattooed a few months ago screamed the whole time. I had to stop twice just to let him recover. I hope you do not whine as much, Mykonos said in a cold tone, as Leo raised an eyebrow in mild confusion, glancing toward Dupravel, who gave him a reassuring nod. Leo sensed no killing intent from the man, which put him somewhat at ease, yet there was still something unsettling about sitting this close to him. The tattooist's appearance and presence carried an eerie weight that Leo could not ignore, as just looking at the marks on his body for too long gave him goosebumps. Don't worry, what you're feeling right now is completely natural. The marks covering my body are called intimidation marks, and they are meant to make all that gaze upon it fear and respect you. You must have a strong mind if they only bother you very slightly, because usually, warriors belonging to the Grandmaster tier often tremble in my presence, Mykonos reassured, as Leo finally understood the reason behind his uneasiness. With the explanation given, Mykonos resumed his work in silence, his hands moving with a precision that spoke of decades of practice. The faint scraping of his marking tool traced each curved line and sharp edge of the death god's sigil across Leo's chest, shoulders, and back. He worked methodically, occasionally stepping around the chair to view his work from different angles, his gaze sharp and calculating. When the final line was drawn, he stepped back, eyes narrowing as he examined the outline in its entirety. After a brief pause, he gave a single nod of approval and turned toward the nearby metal table. Small glass vials of black, silver, and crimson ink lay neatly arranged beside an assortment of finely honed needles. Without hesitation, Mykonos selected a vial of ink so dark it seemed to drink in the light, as he loaded it into the buzzing needle. Returning to Leo's side, he placed his fingers firmly on the young man's left shoulder, the grip almost grounding him for what was about to come. My engraving technique is called branding the flesh. It is among the most painful runic engraving methods in the universe. Expect everything from the tip of your toes to the top of your hair to hurt like hell. That being said, hold your screams in, for it breaks my focus and makes the process less enjoyable for me. Pierce. As soon as the needle bit into his skin, a white-hot line of agony surged through his nerves, spreading like molten metal poured directly into his veins. Leo's jaw tightened, breath caught halfway in his throat, as the pain tore through him with a brutality that no blade, burn, or broken bone had ever matched. It was not the sharp sting of a wound, nor the dull ache of blunt force, but a searing, invasive heat that clawed into the marrow itself, dragging every nerve along with it. His muscles twitched on instinct, yet he forced them still, inhaling slow and deep through his nose, as if anchoring himself against the tide. With time, the sensation refused to fade. Instead, it deepened, gnawing further into flesh and sinew, until each heartbeat seemed to hammer the pain deeper. If you are wondering how much time has passed, Mykonos murmured without looking up, it has been exactly 2 seconds. Leo's teeth ground together, and despite every effort to keep silent, a low growl slipped free. Fuck. It was not loud, but it was enough. The sound earned the faintest curl of amusement on Mykonos' lips, as Leo realized with grim certainty that the next few hours were going to feel like eternity. Chapter 557, Powering Through. Planet Morit, the central jailhouse, second basement floor. Bezit. The needle bit into him again and again, its buzzing a constant vibration against his skin, yet the pain he felt no longer seemed like just physical pain. With every line Mykonos carved, Leo could feel something foreign threading itself through his body, not into muscle or bone, but into the very pathways where his mana flowed. It was as if the man was drawing a new mana conduit over his flesh, one that ran parallel to the network he was born with. The sensation was both strange and suffocating. Unbearable heat flowed along each fresh line before sinking inward, where it tugged against his core as if trying to fuse with it. "This is not mere ink," Mikanos eventually explained, his voice steady despite the intricate work. "What I'm using to paint your body is called the essence of death. It's a liquid that forms when the bones of over 100 rare beasts are smelted together in a furnace." Leo's fingers twitched against the armrest, a fresh wave of fire lancing from his shoulder to his ribs, as he felt slightly uneasy about injecting smelted bones into his body. "This is the same material that's used to make the Death God's staff, and the only material in the universe that can channel the power of death without degrading significantly after each use. Almost anyone can learn the spell that the Second Elder is about to teach you, however, nobody can do it without mitigating the backlash. Any mortal who tries to channel the power of death through their own body will see their mana circuits become inflexible and tainted over time, as death mana significantly corrodes one's interior with every use. You should thank Dragon Kevin for inventing the solution to this problem, as he was the one who realized that engraving Paranthrax sigil on your body was a way to safely cast this spell." Mikanos educated, as at this point the Second Elder's voice joined in from behind. Kevin mapped the entire spell outside his body, across his skin, so that the mana would flow through the engraving instead of his body, and not damage his core. However, the initial materials he used as ink simply could not remain stable when passing the power of death. Regular ink faded after just a single use, while other materials did not last too long either and faded quite easily, until he came across the only compound that could withstand the corrosion. The Second Elder explained, as Leo listened to the whole story intently. This lesson in history, while interesting, unfortunately did nothing to ease his pain, as each new section that Mikanos drew onto his skin brought with it a fresh wave of agony. "How much longer do you need to complete?" Leo asked after a while, as Mikanos looked into his eyes and said, 5 more hours, in the most serious voice he could muster. Faint. Leo faked fainting out at that news, before opening his eyes yet again, as the pain now became visible on his face and expression. "Don't worry, you're already holding out much better than the previous guy the first tattooed. If you remain cooperative, I'll try my best to finish it in under 2 hours." Mikanos encouraged, as Leo bit into his own lips and tried his best to suppress the scream building in his throat. From that point onwards, time blurred into a haze for Leo, who only focused on his breathing to try and get through the pain. For him, every second felt like it stretched for an eternity, as by the time the promised 2 hours were up, he was already drained physically and mentally, with sweat covering every inch of his body from top to bottom. "It's done," Mikanos finally announced with pride, as even he looked surprised to have completed such a large engraving in a single session. "You're the first dragon to complete it in one go. Records show that even Kevin needed to take a single break before he could go again." Mikanos praised, as Leo barely smiled at those words. "Here, you can check out how you look in the reflection of this polished metal," he said, as he moved his cart of supplies near Leo, which contained a polished metallic tray that worked like a mirror. Creak. Leo pushed himself up from the chair slowly, his muscles still trembling from the hours of unrelenting pain, as the cool air of the basement brushed over the raw, burning sensation that lingered on his skin. He leaned forward, catching his reflection in the warped gleam of the metal tray, and for a brief moment, the exhaustion in his eyes was replaced by something else entirely. What stared back at him was almost unrecognizable. His back, shoulders, and stomach were now covered in a sprawling lattice of black lines intertwined with silver veins, every curve and angle locking together to form an unbroken sigil, a mark that seemed to pulse faintly with its own life. The longer he looked, the more it resembled some symbols he had gazed upon in the time-sealed world, as although it was not an exact replica, Leo felt like he could decipher its underlying meaning if he cross-checked the symbols with some ancient texts he had carried out of that world. Thrum. Even dormant, the mark thrummed faintly against his core, as if waiting for his command to activate. This is just the start, the second elder said. You still need to learn and practice the spell to master it. But the learning curve from here onwards should be fairly simple. I'm happy to inform you that you have already completed the most difficult part. Leo's lips curled slowly, the faint smile carrying a dangerous edge. For the first time since sitting in that chair, he could finally think past the mind-numbing pain. As he felt the hum of power beneath his skin, and the promise of what it could do when unleashed. Chapter 558, A Double-Edged Blade. A couple hours later, the central jailhouse, second floor basement. The sharp taste of health restoration potion still clung to Leo's mouth as he lowered the last vial, feeling the mixture work through his body, as it eased the strain in his muscles and steadied his breath. The worst of the burning in his core pathways was already fading, leaving behind only a dull ache that he could ignore. Once his composure returned, he glanced toward the second elder, who had been monitoring his recovery closely, as if waiting for the exact moment to officially start his training. Good, you seem like you're ready to start, he said, as he nodded in satisfaction at his recovery. The technique I am about to teach you today is called the life absorption technique, and it is arguably the most powerful ability in the cult's arsenal, the second elder began, placing his left hand firmly around his right forearm before flexing the fingers of his right hand open. This move does exactly what its name implies. It draws the life force out of those who are already close to death, or those who are certain to reach death's door within moments, and transfers it into you, he explained, his tone calm, which contrasted with the weight of his words. Leo's brow furrowed slightly, a faint confusion flickering across his face. Confused? Let me put it another way, the second elder continued, shifting his explanation. You cannot use this technique on people who are healthy and unharmed. If you were to try it on me right now, it would fail entirely, and you would not take so much as a flicker of my life essence. However, if you were to attempt it on an old man coughing out his last breaths, there is a high probability you would succeed. So when I say, those near the gates of death, I mean people who are almost certain to die within the next 24 to 48 hours, whether you intervene or not. Which makes up the first case. He paused only briefly before moving on. The second case applies to individuals who are already mortally wounded. For example, a decapitated foe or one whose body has been cleaved in half. You might think death is instantaneous in such cases, but it is not. There is often an 8 to 20 second window where, despite their injuries, they are still considered alive, and if you use the technique during that narrow span, your success in stealing their life essence is guaranteed, the second elder explained, as Leo nodded in understanding. The life essence you absorb is one of the most miraculous forces in the universe, the second elder said, his tone shifting into one of barely restrained excitement. Absorb it into your bones and muscles, and your body will harden, your constitution becoming tougher than steel. Draw it into your mana channels, and they will widen and strengthen, allowing greater flows without strain. Feed it to your brain, and your thoughts will sharpen, your mental capacity expanding far beyond its natural limits. Meditate while channeling it, and you will find your progress accelerating at a rate most would call impossible. Leo's eyes widened, the disbelief written plainly across his face. Could such a miraculous force truly exist? Yet, as he looked at the second elder, whose expression was almost alight with childlike excitement, he knew there was no lie in those words. However, the elder continued, his voice taking on a heavier weight, every great power comes with its own price, and this one is no exception. Whatever you choose to enhance with the essence of life will become dependent on it for future growth. Without it, improving that same aspect will be 10 times harder than before. So if you use it to strengthen your body, the results will be immediate and extraordinary, but from that moment on, all training aimed at physical growth will yield only 1/10 of the results, unless you continue to rely on absorbing life essence. That is why one must choose carefully. This is why, despite being miraculous, this technique is a double-edged sword. Leo's earlier awe became immediately replaced by caution, as he was reminded that there were no free meals in the universe. When something sounded too good to be true, it almost always was. So it's a desperation skill, huh? I suppose one must only use it to break through bottlenecks. Leo thought, as he remained eerily silent. The temptation was obvious. The technique offered power at a pace that defied reason, giving weak and untalented warriors a means to leap past years of grinding effort in the space of a single breath, yet the price was equally absolute in the form of a slow poisoning that would damage his own potential if they leaned on it too often. This is not a good trade. No matter how I look at it. Leo thought, as he could almost picture himself years from now, standing at the breakthrough point of a higher tier, only to realize he couldn't do it without absorbing the life essence of thousands to help him. You must understand, Leo, there is no undoing it once the choice is made. This is not a tool for ambition, it is a lifeline for desperation. You should only turn to it when you find yourself before a wall that cannot be broken by any natural means, or when every path forward is closed, and the only remaining option is to carve a new one with this technique. Anything less, and you will waste your future for the sake of the present. The second elder warned, his voice serious. A warrior's foundation is forged through effort and endurance. Strip that away, and you are left with something fragile, no matter how strong it appears at the moment. Do not become addicted to ease, or one day you will find yourself unable to fight without it. Leo inhaled slowly, the cool air of the basement catching in his chest as he looked back at the elder, pure rage filling his eyes. Did you warn Ver of the drawbacks of this technique? Or did you misguide him into absorbing life essence to grow stronger, and compromise his foundation as a result? Leo asked angrily, as the second elder shrugged his shoulders in response. I told him the same words I am telling you today. I swear. Everything from that point onwards was Ver's own decision, the second elder clarified, as Leo found himself turning speechless. If this technique was really as dangerous as the second elder described, then Ver had no business absorbing it while only being a Grand Master, as it could seriously hinder his future growth now. If you don't mind telling me, what did Ver use his life essence to help him for? Leo asked, as the second elder shook his head in disappointment. The dragon used the essence of life to improve his mind and body. This means that going forward he must rely on wars and killing righteous faction opponents to keep growing stronger. As without it, it will be substantially more difficult for him to reach the peak of the transcendent tier and break through to becoming a monarch. The second elder said, as Leo scoffed in disbelief. It seemed like the elders' council had done it again. It seemed like once more, they had killed the potential of the cult's dragon. Chapter 559, A Setup. After hearing the drawbacks tied to life absorption, Leo naturally felt a wave of apprehension about learning such a move. Do not worry. Unless you use the absorbed life essence to enhance yourself in some way, it will simply remain stored within your body, inert and harmless, gradually dissipating over time while adding to your lifespan. There is no danger in merely knowing the technique. However, the temptation to use it for a quick breakthrough will only grow once it rests inside you, for in moments of weakness, you may find yourself unable to resist calling upon it, the second elder reassured, snapping his fingers to signal for the first subject to be brought in. Snap, clink, clink. Leo recognized the sound of chains, as under the second elder's instructions, a frail prisoner was led into the room. The man's eyes were hollow, his ribs pressing sharply against his skin as though he had been denied a proper meal for months. He looked too weak to stand, his hands and ankles bruised raw where the metal had rubbed for weeks on end. Each step forward that the poor guy took seemed to drain what little life he still had, until eventually, he collapsed in a heap from the effort of walking alone. Huff huff, please, end this suffering. The hunger. I cannot bear it any longer, the man pleaded, his voice trembling as the second elder stepped forward and raised his right palm. Be free now, the elder murmured, activating the life absorption technique as the silver lines of his tattoo began to glow faintly. Leo watched the scene unfold as though time itself had slowed. Mana coursed through the intricate marks upon the elder's back, flowing first through the silver channels to awaken the spell. The moment it was cast, a gray, mist-like essence was drawn from the prisoner's mouth, eyes, and ears, streaming into the second elder's palm. Thud. Soon, the man's body gave a final shudder before collapsing lifelessly to the floor. Glow. As the essence entered the elder's body, the black lines of the tattoo flared to life, holding and distributing the strange, otherworldly fog until it spread evenly across the entire surface of the mark, safely stored and contained like a treasure waiting to be claimed. That's all there is to it. That's all you need to learn. The second elder said, as he looked at Leo with an almost sinister, inhumane smile. The only thing you need to learn about this spell is how to channel it correctly, which shouldn't be too difficult for a warrior of your stature. The rest, as you see, is automatic. The second elder explained, as Leo clenched his fists in anger. He knew it wasn't wise to rebel here, to let his intentions to overthrow the council be laid bare. And hence, he grit his teeth and bided his time, as he paid attention on how to activate the technique, should the need ever arise for him to use it. As thankfully, in just under 6 hours, he managed to learn how to cast the move to perfect mastery, making the second elder feel satisfied about his tutelage. Are you sure you don't want to absorb the life essence of a few prisoners present here? They are criminals who are going to die of starvation regardless of whether you kill them now or not. In a way, they are the only lives you can claim guilt-free. The second elder offered, as Leo scoffed and shook his head in denial. No thank you, I'm not a very noble individual. I think I'll sleep well even if I steal the life essence of someone who perhaps did not deserve to die. That isn't my concern. My problem is with the move dampening my future growth should I use it, as that is the one area I'm absolutely not ready to compromise on. Leo said, as he rejected the elder's offer to kill a few criminals. Take a moment to reconsider my offer, Shadow Dragon. Although I don't know what's keeping you from breaking through to the transcendent tier, I'm sure that by absorbing life essence you can achieve that breakthrough in under 2 months. The second elder suggested, as Leo once again decisively refused the bait. You're a good teacher, second elder, you taught me one of the cult's 12 forbidden techniques in under a day. I think we are done here. I'll forever remember the gratitude you showed me today, Leo said with a genuine sounding tone, which was in truth fake. Very well then, if you have already made up your mind about it, then I won't keep you here any longer. Please report to the fourth elder tomorrow morning on planet Seraph, for the next phase of your training. The second elder said, as he too spoke in a genuine sounding voice that was in truth fake. Secretly, the second elder had hoped that Leo would prove to be a weak-willed individual who would come to rely on absorbing life essence to grow stronger, as that would guarantee he never rose beyond the monarch tier at best, ensuring he could never outgrow the cult's power structure, giving the Elders' Council the ultimate leverage to control him. If the dragon ever dared to step out of line, this would serve as their blackmail card, a weapon to sway the masses into believing that the dragon was not the noble figure they imagined, but a tainted figure who had fed on the lives of others to advance. This death god's brand upon his body, combined with any record of him using life essence to strengthen himself, would weave a convincing narrative that painted him as a ruthless, power-hungry opportunist with no moral restraint. Yet, in truth, it mattered little to the second elder whether Leo actually chose to use the technique or not. Now that the brand had been seared into his skin, the elder knew he could always twist the story to suit his needs, for in the end, the truth itself was irrelevant. What mattered was the tale the masses were made to believe. Chapter 560, Crimes and Punishment. Ver's Paw, Planet Coral. While Leo departed Planet Coral for training, Ver became engulfed in public speeches, layers of bureaucracy, and the exhausting work of post-war cleanup, as he faced a constant stream of minor disputes and major crises that demanded his immediate attention. Unbeknownst to him, the victory that had seemed so decisive in the field was only the beginning of another kind of battle, one fought with patience, negotiation, and the constant mending of fraying tempers, as never in his wildest dreams could Ver have imagined just how complicated it really was to lead an army. The dragon's army was not a hardened military but a ragtag force of volunteers, most of whom had been merchants, miners, or farmers only weeks ago. Although 6 weeks of basic training had been enough to win the war, it was far from enough to instill true discipline, as when push came to shove and the men were asked to put in hard hours of patrol, they immediately began to groan and complain. On paper the evacuation process seemed like something extremely simple. Ships would depart daily, manifests would be checked, and lines would move with precision. In practice, however, it was pure chaos. Families arrived at the embarkation gates dragging ornate furniture or heavy chests, refusing to board until their possessions were loaded. Others openly declared they would remain on Coral, even under cult rule, forcing officers into long, draining negotiations that often ended with these citizens being escorted to the transports against their will. On the 5th day of evacuation, a middle-aged man attempted to smuggle a mana bomb strapped to his chest near the hangar bay area. When the guards uncovered it, and rightfully beat the man for it, the man claimed innocence and said that he had no idea that a bomb was strapped to his body, which made for a truly bizarre case, for he was not the first one to make such a claim. Across the planet, multiple such incidents were reported that day, and the Dragon Army could not make sense of it. Similarly, another incident saw 2 young soldiers who had previously surrendered, now suddenly revolting, as they claimed the lives of 2 inspection officers, which immediately sparked outrage amongst the cult security. From that moment onwards, they became extra rough with every Planet Coral soldier they came across, as the atmosphere almost boiled to the point of riots. The crowd began to jeer, and Vare was forced to move personally to defuse the situation. "I have given my word that the righteous faction soldiers who surrendered will be treated with dignity," he told his men, his voice cold, as he instructed them to keep calm. Then, turning to the crowd of righteous soldiers, he added, "You will cooperate with my men, and not throw extra tantrums when you walk up for inspection. One of your people murdered 2 of my men. Don't forget, it's we who are doing you people a favor by letting you walk out of this planet unharmed. Because otherwise, we are very well within our rights to kill every soldier that we capture," he reminded, as he silenced the rebelling crowd with a concealed threat to not test his patience. However, perhaps his most frustrating case came on the last day of evacuation, when a mistreatment report came across his desk, claiming that some of his men had forcibly kidnapped a beautiful local, and were holding her against her will in a city house. This case was particularly difficult because punishing his own men was a slippery slope, as it risked sowing resentment among the ranks. Yet the nature of the crime left no room for hesitation. Vare began his investigation quietly, as he sent trusted aides to speak to witnesses, cross-checked testimonies, and review patrol records from the sector in question. The more details emerged, the worse the situation became. Apparently, it was not the act of a few rogue individuals, but the coordinated misconduct of an entire unit, including a captain, a corporal, 12 soldiers, and 2 female troopers. The evidence was undeniable. They had forcibly detained a local woman, holding her captive in a small city house while taking turns violating her over several days. Witness accounts matched the physical evidence gathered by investigators, leaving no doubt as to their guilt. Vare's decision was swift. Every individual involved was placed under arrest and charged with war crimes. The captain, along with the rest of the unit, were immediately stripped of rank and sentenced to military imprisonment. The corporal, however, bore the greatest responsibility for initiating and organizing the act, and for him, Vare had only one sentence: death. It was a decision he took no pleasure in, but one he believed necessary to set an unshakable precedent. When the trial concluded and the sentences were handed down, Vare ordered the woman brought to the main plaza. Before an audience of thousands of soldiers, he stepped forward, removed his helmet, and dropped to his knees, pressing his forehead to the ground in a deep kowtow. "For the crimes my men have committed against you, I offer my sincerest apology," he said, his voice steady yet heavy with regret. "Their shame is my shame, and I can't begin to express how truly sorry I am that this happened to you." The gesture silenced the crowd, with the highest echelons of the Dragon Army feeling the weight of the moment. Vare then presented her with a compensation of 20 million MP, delivered on the spot, and publicly vowed that every man and woman responsible would face the consequences of their actions. His final words to the troops that day were a warning, that the Dragon's army would never become a force that preyed on the weak, and that any who strayed from that path would meet the same fate as the corporal who now awaited execution. It was an unexpected event, but one that Vare deemed to be extremely necessary, as after that day, every soldier in the Dragon's army understood one truth: Their leader's wrath would fall harder on those who shamed their banner than on any enemy, and no rank, no past glory, or excuse could shield them from the justice he demanded. Chapter 561, Su Pei uncovers the truth. Meanwhile, the Skyshard Mansion, Su Pei's POV. Su Pei was quite surprised to see just how warm and friendly Liu's family really was, as although it was his first day living amongst them, the family did not treat him as a stranger at all. When he first entered the house, he was given a few dirty glares that he was used to. However, as soon as he revealed that it was Liu who sent him to check on his brother, the family's attitude towards him took a sudden 180. Elena, Liu's mother, eagerly led him through a tour of the house, her voice brimming with warmth as she insisted on serving home-cooked dishes bursting with flavors he had never experienced, even after living for centuries. Alia, Luke's girlfriend, arrived with freshly warmed towels, making sure he was comfortable as she helped him settle into the guest room. Jacob offered to take him around the city whenever he wished, promising to be his guide. While Amanda, Leo's girlfriend, leaned in with a smile, asking if there was any tool or gadget he might want crafted, anything at all that could make his life just a little more comfortable. It was all a new sensation for Su Pei, who had forgotten what it was like to have the warmth of a loving family, ever since he lost his own half a century ago. Here, he did not feel like a monarch or an important commander in charge of running a planet, as even without consuming alcohol, he felt relaxed and simply glad to be alive. Naturally, since his main purpose for being here was to uncover what was wrong with Leo's brother Luke, once he had settled in, Su Pei wasted no time in turning his attention to that task. He began by engaging Luke in short, casual conversations, gradually easing into topics that might reveal the root of his troubles before moving toward more specific questions to understand his circumstances in greater detail. When Luke eventually spoke about the Red Army and how they had hunted him for over a year, Su Pei quickly noticed troubling inconsistencies in the account, since his knowledge of the Red Army clashed significantly with Luke's recount of what happened. Still, he chose not to interrupt, allowing Luke to finish his story in full. During this time, Su Pei observed every shift in Luke's demeanor, noting when his expression clouded over or when his hands fidgeted in uneasy silence. With patience, he guided their talks toward the details that raised his suspicion, as he asked Luke about the skills the Red Army warriors had used while pursuing him, and the types of weapons they carried. But to his disappointment, every answer Luke gave was incorrect. Someone has corrupted his memory, someone most likely belonging to the cult, and they have done a sloppy job. Su Pei soon realized, as being a veteran who had seen many such cases, he immediately knew that Luke's memory had been tampered with. The exact tell came when Luke spoke about certain events with unusual hesitation, his right hand giving a faint, involuntary jerk each time he mentioned something that Su Pei knew could not have been true. It was a subtle movement, almost imperceptible to an untrained eye, but to Su Pei, it was the hallmark of an implanted memory struggling to take root. The inconsistencies were glaring. The Red Army was infamous for its signature curved blades, a weapon so ingrained in their identity that not carrying one would be akin to denying their allegiance. Yet Luke described them wielding straight swords as if it were the most natural detail in the world. Equally suspicious was his failure to recall the Red Army's use of red smoke bombs, a standard tool employed to disorient targets during ambushes. There was also no mention of their hallmark skills like double step and quick slash, both of which were executed by nearly every trained warrior in their ranks. Su Pei listened without correcting him, but each omission deepened his certainty. These were not the mistakes of a man with poor memory, but of someone whose recollections had been deliberately rewritten. The hand jerk was simply the final confirmation. By the time Luke finished, Su Pei no longer wondered whether his mind had been tampered with. The only questions now were who had done it, and for what purpose. I don't know why you're asking him all these questions about the Red Army, but if you want it, I have an independent audit report on what might have happened to Luke. Jacob said once the conversation between Su Pei and Luke was complete, as Su Pei raised an eyebrow in confusion. I had two separate independent investigators look into Luke's past while he had trouble recalling it, and they submitted a report a month later, based on what they found out. Jacob said, as Su Pei gestured for him to hand over that report. Slide. Soon, Jacob fetched those files and slid them over for Su Pei to read. As Su Pei read every word in that file thoroughly, a faint smile passing through his lips. These are cult investigators. People who live on this planet. He asked, as Jacob nodded and pointed towards the names of the investigators who had worked on this case and signed their initials at the end. Is something wrong? Jacob asked, his fatherly senses picking up the signals that there might be some trouble, but Su Pei simply shook his head and told him not to worry. No trouble, he replied, his voice calm but carrying an edge. But there are a few things in here that I need to clarify with these investigators, so I'll be visiting them tomorrow, preferably alone. The room grew quiet. No one needed to be told that Su Pei would not make such a visit unless something was very wrong. Yet with him offering nothing more, all they could do was wait for whatever tomorrow would bring. Chapter 562, A Surprising Discovery. Planet Vorthas, the shopper's market. Next morning, Su Pei's POV. Su Pei arrived at the small, nondescript building tucked between a pawn shop and a spice merchant's stall, its faded sign reading, Marrowstone Investigations, in chipped gold paint. This was the address that Jacob had given him, informing him about how the private investigator inside came highly recommended, which was why he sought him out. However, judging by the shoddy state of the establishment, Su Pei did not feel impressed at all. Inside, the office was dimly lit, a single fan turning lazily overhead as a middle-aged man in a dark vest sat behind a cluttered desk. Stacks of files, unwashed cups, and an old ink blotter crowded the space, which once again ticked Su Pei off, who was a bit of a neat freak. However, he did not let his disappointment show, as he walked in with an easy smile, the kind one might use when seeking help rather than delivering a threat, and took the seat across from the investigator who seemed to be happy to see a customer. Please, tell me, gentlemen, how may I help you? The investigator asked in a deep voice, as Su Pei made a distressed expression. You must understand, good sir, Su Pei began, resting his elbows lightly on the desk, my wife. I don't think she is who she claims to be. I think, she might be a spy for the righteous faction, or a part of the infamous Red Army. I want to report her to the authorities, but she's my wife. So I don't want to turn her in, unless I'm absolutely sure. Su Pei explained, as the investigator let out a soft chuckle. That is a serious claim. Most who throw it around have no idea what they're saying. Why do you think your wife is a part of the Red Army? The investigator asked, as he tried to dig deeper and find out the basis behind this allegation. I do not make this claim lightly, Su Pei replied in a quiet tone, leaning forward as though sharing a personal confession. I have seen her hide a long sword from me, the long, straight and pointy kind used by high-tier warriors. And once, I managed to retrieve a gray smoke orb from her. Now tell me, why would she need a smoke orb? She told me she used to be an adventurer and a tank before she married me. The investigator sighed, leaning back in his chair, his fingers drumming against the armrest as though he were disappointed in this conversation. Look, sir, I will investigate your wife if that's what you wish. I am not denying that there is a possibility that she might be affiliated with the righteous faction, but I highly doubt she belongs to the Red Army in particular. Su Pei tilted his head slightly. Why is that? You see, Red Army members. Most of them, at least 9 in 10, carry a distinct curved blade. It is their signature, their pride, their mark of belonging. As for the smoke bomb you found, I do not know why a tank would carry it, but I can tell you this, if she were in the Red Army, the smoke bomb would be red, not gray. He spread his hands as though the matter were settled. So while your wife may not be who she says she is, I do not think she belongs to the Red Army either. Su Pei's lips curved into a polite smile, his eyes never leaving the man's face. I see. So you do know about the signature style the Red Army operates with. That is good to know. The investigator blinked, sensing the faintest shift in tone, but said nothing. But then, Su Pei continued, his voice as calm as before, if you do know this. I wonder why you did not flag a report when you examined the wounds on one Luke Skyshard. Every single injury on his body was caused by straight blades. Every single one, yet in your report as a private investigator, you blamed it all on the Red Army. I wonder why. The temperature in the room seemed to drop a few degrees, the hum of the fan overhead sounding louder in the sudden silence. The investigator's eyes flickered briefly to the door before darting back to Su Pei. What nonsense are you talking about? I know nothing of what you speak. Please leave my office at once, he said sharply, his hand sliding beneath the desk. Su Pei made no move as the man pulled out a short blade, its edge worn but serviceable, and pointed it across the desk. The blade did not even have time to catch the light before a sudden, crushing weight filled the air. Crash! The investigator's chair splintered as he collapsed to the floor, his limbs locking under the pressure of Su Pei's aura. The man could not so much as lift his head. His breath came in shallow, wheezing gasps, each one an effort against the invisible force pinning him down. My, Su Pei murmured, standing slowly and walking around the desk with the measured steps of someone entirely unhurried. You were not planning to threaten me, were you? The investigator's eyes widened, the disbelief plain even as his body trembled under the weight crushing him. Who are you? He rasped. Su Pei crouched beside him, moving the desk aside with one hand as though it were made of paper. I am Su Pei. I work for Master Leo Skyshard. Your shadow dragon. The man's face drained of color, his lips parting soundlessly. I believe he is disappointed in how you have been lying to him about his brother's condition, Su Pei said quietly, the words slipping from his tongue like a calm observation rather than an accusation. I. Do not waste breath on lies, Su Pei interrupted, his tone still level, though his aura pressed down harder, drawing a strangled gasp from the man. I will know instantly if you lie. I am a monarch, and I do not need tricks to see through falsehoods. Now, tell me the truth. I am not with the righteous faction, so you shouldn't feel shame in telling me what really happened. In fact, you should fear what happens if you hold it back. The man's chest rose and fell rapidly, panic clouding his eyes as sweat gathered along his temple. They forced me to alter my report, he stammered. The TW, 12th Elder's office, and a woman named Mu Fan. The name hung in the air like a stone dropped into still water. Su Pei's brows drew together slightly. The 12th Elder's office. But why, he said softly, would the cult's management be involved in this? The investigator made a desperate, choking sound, but before Su Pei could press further, his body went slack. He had fainted, his breath shallow but steady. Su Pei straightened, brushing the dust from his hands as though nothing of consequence had occurred, and walked toward the door without a backward glance. Outside, the street was still quiet and it seemed like his interrogation had gone without any major issues. However, what he learnt from it was most surprising to say the least. Su Pei had not expected the cult's own high-ranking members to have a hand in altering Luke's memories, for if that were true, then the very foundation of trust within the system was already crumbling beneath their feet. For now, Su Pei chose to keep his discovery to himself, his steps carrying him toward the second private investigator's office, the other man who had also worked on the case. There was no point in sounding the alarm until he could confirm the full extent of the matter, yet if his suspicions were proven beyond doubt, he could not help but wonder how his master would react when the truth came to light. Chapter 563, Confirmation. Planet Vorthas, Su Pei's POV. After finishing his interrogation of the first private investigator, Su Pei made his way toward the office of the second man who had worked on the case, the one who had also submitted a report nearly identical to the first. He had hoped that this visit might reveal a thread leading away from the cult elder's office, something that would prove that the involvement of the cult leadership in this case was a mere coincidence rather than deliberate action. But unfortunately, that hope proved to be short-lived, as the second investigator's account mirrored the first almost word for word. According to him, there was a woman named Mu Fan who worked directly under the 12th Elder's office, and she had been personally responsible for altering the reports. Worse still, from the way he described it, she had not acted alone, but had done so under the explicit direction of the 12th Elder himself, as she convinced the two private investigators that this was for the greater good of the cult. Oh no, Su Pei muttered with a sigh, pinching the bridge of his nose before shaking his head slowly. This was not the outcome he had wanted to uncover, because if it was true, then Luke was entangled in a matter that reached far beyond a simple investigation. This was no longer just about identifying who had hurt him, but rather about understanding why the cult's upper echelons would go to such lengths to bury the truth. And as Su Pei mulled over the possibilities, one explanation rose to the surface like oil over water, stubborn and impossible to ignore. The only reason the cult leadership would fabricate an entirely false version of events was if they themselves were responsible for the injuries. Su Pei could not see another possibility. If the Red Army had truly been the culprits, there would have been no need to tamper with physical evidence or rewrite witness statements. The cult would have paraded the truth as proof of their enemies' cruelty, using it to rally their own forces and inspire loyalty among the masses. But instead, they had chosen to hide it, to erase every sign of what had really happened, and that decision alone told him everything he needed to know. Messing with the Shadow Dragon's family. How is that a smart decision? He wondered aloud, his voice carrying a note of disbelief as he continued to shake his head. The dragons were supposed to be the messiahs of the cult, figures of near-divine reverence among the common folk. Their victories were celebrated like holy days, their words carried as gospel, and their presence on the battlefield turned tides that no ordinary general could move. To harm the family of a dragon, especially one as feared and respected as Leo, was to invite chaos into the heart of the cult itself. It risked not only political scandal, but the erosion of the public's faith in their leadership. And yet, the 12th Elder's office had done it. So, why? The question gnawed at Su Pei as he considered the possibilities. Was it a personal vendetta? A power struggle within the cult's hierarchy? Or had Luke stumbled into something so sensitive, so dangerous, that eliminating him outright had seemed less risky than letting him speak? Whatever the reason, it was reckless, and now the truth was about to come back to haunt them all. Well, I wonder how the master will react to this news. Su Pei murmured, his sigh long and weary as he imagined the possible fallout. Leo was not the kind of man who took betrayals lightly, and Su Pei could only imagine how he would respond once he learned the truth. If the 12th Elder truly was behind this, then the cult might have just set into motion a chain of events they would not be able to stop. For now, Su Pei decided to delve deeper into this matter and find out more about this Mu Fan character, as she seemed central to the chain of events. Meanwhile, Mu Fan. Ever since Amanda had changed Ben's body, Mu Fan had been in a quiet state of panic, because since that moment, she had lost her eyes and ears inside the Skyshard mansion. On one hand, she told herself she had done a thorough job covering the cult's tracks, sealing away Luke's true memories and replacing them with something far more convenient. On the other hand, the fear of being found out refused to leave her mind, whispering to her at every idle moment that someone might already be pulling at the edges of her work. I reported to the 12th Elder days ago that we have lost our surveillance inside the mansion, she muttered under her breath, flicking through the external camera feeds with restless fingers, and yet there has been no response, no replacement plan, nothing. It's like he doesn't think we can be caught anymore at all. She leaned back in her chair, exhaling sharply. It would be too obvious to plant new microphones or monitoring devices inside the house, yet leaving it unwatched was equally unacceptable. Her eyes lingered on one feed showing the street outside, a shadow crossing the edge of the frame before vanishing from view. For reasons she couldn't name, a faint chill crept up her spine, as she replayed the feed frame by frame. Su Pei, she muttered, recognizing the previous commander's face, as she shivered once more. A couple days ago, she had received a report that Su Pei would arrive at the Skyshard mansion to help Luke with his recovery back to peak strength, and somehow, since that very day her anxiety about their wrongdoings being uncovered flared. She did not like the idea of a monarch-level entity spending too much time with Luke, as the more time they spent together, the greater the risk was for their secret to be uncovered. However, with the 12th elder not caring too much about the situation, all she could do was bite her nails and pray, since she had no actual power of her own to make any independent decisions. Chapter 564, Meeting 4th Elder. Leo's Paw, Planet Seraph. The very next day after mastering life absorption, Leo was sent to Planet Seraph to train under the 4th Elder and learn his secret technique. Although every elder within the council was, to some degree, a self-serving politician, Leo had always felt that the 1st and 4th elders were assholes that were a grade above the rest. It was not because they were any more selfish than the others, but because they possessed a sharper cunning and a level of foresight that the others lacked. The 4th elder in particular had been Vare's most prominent supporter before the dragon selection, and Leo knew him to be a man whose ambition was matched only by his willingness to use any means necessary to achieve his aims. That alone made Leo wary, for while an enemy on the battlefield could be countered, the kind of mind that wove schemes within schemes was hard to compete against. Now, with his destination set and the prospect of training under such a man looming over him, Leo found himself wondering not just what he would learn on Planet Seraph, but what price might be hidden within that lesson. Welcome to my humble training ground. The 4th elder greeted with a warm smile, gesturing toward the wide, open courtyard beyond the shaded veranda. Thank you for having me, Leo replied, his tone courteous, his smile practiced. Their pleasantries drifted between them like a thin veil, each man speaking in the tone expected of his station, neither offering more than protocol demanded. The elder led him slowly through the training grounds, taking his time as they passed rows of weapon racks, sparring circles, and tiered stone platforms worn smooth from years of use. From a distance, attendants kept watch, their eyes sharp even in idleness. Vare has already begun learning this technique, but he hasn't mastered it yet. Unfortunately, his training remained incomplete before your match began, the elder remarked, his voice pleasant but carrying a note of narcissism beneath it. If he mastered the technique I wanted to teach him before your bout, perhaps he could have won. But oh well, you surrendered anyhow, so it doesn't matter, ha ha ha. Leo kept his expression neutral, offering only a fake, I have no doubt he would have, as a response. Stop. They paused near the center platform, which was a polished slab of reinforced stone large enough for several warriors to duel without crowding, as it was here that the 4th elder began his demonstration. I imagine you have been taught many strength-enhancing methods in your career as a warrior already, he said at last, but what I'll teach you today is something unique. This skill is not something you will find in the open market, and in the right hands, it can shift the course of a battle in an instant. Leo inclined his head slightly. Then I look forward to learning it. With a wave of his hand, the elder dismissed his attendants, who scurried away at his signal. Boots shuffled, doors closed, and soon the two stood alone in the vast, echoing space. The technique I'm about to teach you is called enhance, he began, lowering his voice as though unveiling a treasured secret. A faint mist curled from beneath his boots, rolling outward in lazy tendrils before vanishing. In the same moment, he bent his knees and launched himself into the air, not with the labored arc of mortal effort, but with the sudden, explosive lift like a spring unbound. Woosh! He soared past the 100-foot mark, before staying suspended in the air for several heartbeats as though the wind itself obeyed him. Then with a sharp yet controlled descent, landed back below with an impact that rippled through the stone. Thud. As you just saw, with this move, you can temporarily amplify the strength of any specific body part. You saw me focusing this energy into my legs just now. But if you focus it into your arms, you will strike with the weight of a siege weapon. Focus it into your back, and you can take a hit that would crush lesser warriors. There is no limitation to this technique except your imagination, and your control. Leo's brow lifted slightly in approval, his mind already considering its potential uses. It's not like enhance is the only reinforcement spell in the market. Of course there are many others, but every last one of them has flaws that enhance does not, the elder continued, as he spoke about his technique with pride. Usual reinforcements techniques consume too much mana and too much time to activate, and can often be only used once or twice a day for temporary effects. However, Enhance is not bound by those usual flaws. It activates instantly, costs barely any mana, and the cooldown is only 20 seconds. You can use it again and again without strain, and that, my young dragon, is what separates it from the rest. Leo nodded slowly, his mind already sketching scenarios where such a technique could turn a battle in his favor. How fast you can grasp this technique depends on two factors: 1, your natural comprehension, and 2, how smooth your body's mana channels are. The fourth elder said, his voice steady. For this technique to work, you must pump large amounts of mana through your circuits in a very short time. That kind of strain cannot be sustained unless your channels are incredibly smooth and well-conditioned, he said, as he took a slow step forward, his gaze fixed on Leo. Often, the real problem in learning this technique is not understanding how to execute it, but surviving the injuries that come during practice. The path to smoothening your mana veins is never easy, it is a road paved with struggle, so often you will find your mana circuits damaged, forcing you to rest for a few days till they heal to then go again, the fourth elder warned, as Leo smiled gently in response. Although the elder was unaware of it, Leo possessed a mana heart that constantly refined and smoothed his mana circuits. So by now, they were so impeccably conditioned that few in the galaxy could compare. Because of that, he had no doubt that he would be able to master this technique in record time. Chapter 565, A True Talent. Leo's Paw, Planet Seraph, Training Grounds. After explaining what Enhance did, the fourth elder moved on to explaining how one could master it. The reason I told you that you need absolutely smooth mana circuits, he began without preamble, is because this technique is not like anything else you have learned. When you use a normal skill, you are guiding mana along a predetermined course in a steady uninterrupted flow, like a river that has always moved in a set way, while you just guide it slightly. He paced in front of Leo as he spoke, his hands clasped behind his back, as he shifted into the tone of a teacher who was absolutely certain of his own genius. But Enhance requires you to destroy that natural rhythm. It requires you to go against that flow of the river and create a whirlpool. Enhance forces you to suck in every last drop of mana in your body towards one single point all at once, and the two in the time span of less than a heartbeat. The strain this puts on your circuits is not merely high, it is catastrophic for anyone who has not conditioned their bodies for it. The fourth elder explained as Leo gave a small nod, his face calm. You see, when unprepared circuits are forced to channel this much mana in one place, the pressure creates micro tears. And when those micro tears form, they disrupt your entire cycle, meaning you cannot even gather mana properly until they heal. Which is why we train in stages. As only fools try to skip ahead to the more advanced stages without forming the proper foundation first, only to then find themselves bedridden for weeks when their bodies give out. He gestured for Leo to follow him onto the large central platform, its stone surface glinting faintly in the sunlight. Stage 1, he said, is simple in theory but exhausting in practice. You will focus every pathway in your body on delivering mana to a single fingertip. Not a hand, not an arm, a fingertip. And you will do it without leakage. You will pull mana from your toes, from your spine, from your scalp, and it will all arrive in that one fingertip without losing a single thread along the way. Until you can do that, there is no point moving forward. He smiled faintly, as if remembering something. When I first trained it, it took me 7 months before I could sustain it for more than 5 seconds without pain. Leo inclined his head slightly. 7 months. Yes, the elder said, missing the faint note of sarcasm in Leo's voice entirely. Stage 2, once you have mastered this, is learning how to shift that gathered mana instantly between limbs. Arm to leg to arm to arm, leg to leg. The transition must be seamless, because in battle you will never have the luxury of holding power in one limb forever. This is where most people start to cry out in pain, because your channels are being pulled in multiple directions in rapid succession. I was a prodigy. I only took a year to perfect it. He waited, perhaps expecting Leo to be impressed. But Leo gave him nothing but a polite, I see. Stage 3 is where the real strain begins, the elder continued, his tone swelling with pride. You will take the entire capacity of your mana circuit and drive it into a single limb, not for a split second, but for as long as possible. If your channels are not smooth enough, they will swell, rupture, and you will spend weeks healing. But if you endure it, your pathways begin to adapt, widening and smoothing themselves in response to the strain. Leo's mind ticked over the implications. With his mana heart constantly repairing and refining his circuits, he could probably jump directly to this stage and beyond. Still, he said nothing, letting the elder talk. Stage 4, the elder said, lifting his chin slightly, is maintaining this output while moving. Footwork drills, weapon swings, evasive jumps, all while keeping that limb fully charged. Most people fail here because they cannot split their focus between motion and mana flow without losing efficiency. And then, finally, he paused, clearly savoring the moment. Stage 5 is the pinnacle. You will fully reinforce your entire body, flooding every pathway with mana, and then in a single instant, collapse all of it into one point. That is the true form of enhance, and it is this compression that allows you to produce feats like the jump you saw me perform earlier. The elder clasped his hands behind his back again, looking rather pleased with himself. It will probably take you 6 months before you can attempt this without injury. I, for example, only reached the final stage after nearly 5 years of constant training, and I was considered one of the fastest learners the council had ever seen. But I know you and Ver are more talented than me, and can probably both master this in about a year. Leo tilted his head slightly. A year, you say? Yes. Or a couple. Do not. But the elder's words cut off as Leo closed his eyes, and directly jumped to phase 5. Mana rushed inward from every channel in his body, compressing into his legs in perfect harmony without the slightest trace of leakage or strain. The air around him hummed faintly before his body blurred and shot upward like a cannon shot. Whoosh! He cleared the 50-foot mark easily, hung in the air for a moment, and then landed in a crouch, the stone beneath his boots barely cracking under the impact. Thud! The elder stared at him, lips parting slightly before pressing into a thin line. What the fuck? You skipped straight to the last step, your mana circuits must be shredded beyond repair. They're fine, Leo cut in, brushing some dust from his shoulder. The balance on my first attempt was off, but 20 seconds and I can try again. The fourth elder actually laughed, a short, incredulous sound. 20 seconds. Boy, I've seen arrogance before, but this. Whoosh. Leo was already gone, shooting upward again. This time he reached 70 feet, landed without so much as a stumble, and gave the elder a look that was almost bored. The elder's jaw twitched. Lucky. Your channels are fraying as we speak, you'll see. But then came the third jump. And the fourth. And the fifth. By the seventh jump, a bead of sweat slid down the elder's temple, though whether it was from the sun or something far more unsettling, even he wasn't sure. By the 10th jump, he stopped pretending to look anywhere else. By the 15th, his arms had slowly crossed over his chest, the same way one braces against a sudden chill. By the 20th, he'd stopped speaking entirely, watching in silence as Leo landed, adjusted his footing, and prepared for yet another go without the slightest pause. 2 hours later, as Leo came down from a jump that easily cleared 100 feet, the elder just looked at him as if his whole worldview had just been shattered to bits. His jaw now hung open, as drool slid down his chin and dripped on the floor below. I think I've got the hang of the jump. It's easy to do when it's the only thing I have to focus on, but I think I need about a week's more practice to make it an instinct in battle and learn how to do it with every part of my body. Leo said casually, as the fourth elder did not respond. He just stared with a dull disoriented look on his face, which was the kind of look that was worn by a man who had just realized that the universe was not as he understood it. Ver took 4 months to even touch stage 3, and I already thought he was a freak. Compared to him, this boy is just... No, I refuse to believe it. He's not human. That's it. He's some kind of freak. And yet, no matter how he tried to frame it, the truth gnawed at him. Leo Skyshard was a monster. A monster who had just taken his life's proudest technique, and mastered its final step before lunch. No wonder he won against Ver even with a tier disadvantage. This boy, he's a talent like no other. A true dragon candidate if I've ever seen one. He realized, as he finally understood why the 12th Elder backed him to become dragon. For more thrilling fanfiction stories like this, check out my channel Fanfic Audiobook. Dive into epic adventures, mysterious realms, and legendary journeys brought to life through immersive storytelling. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more amazing audiobooks.